This movie is just more leftover recycled garbage from the last 4 times around. It uses the same basic old formula, the formula I call the dead teenager formula.
Hello, listeners past, present, and future. This is Haddonfield Radio, where, as always, we bring you the history, legacy, and lore of movies, trailers, and more. This season, we will be joining you for a deep dive fan commentary journey through every single film in the Friday the 13th franchise, featuring everybody's favorite, undisputed king of killers, Roy Burns. So, yeah. My name, as always, is Christian White.
And I'm Joe Francazio.
1985 was, to say the least, a very heady year for Texas-born filmmaker Tobe Hooper, the infamous director of The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a film whose title alone instigated sheer dread in stunned audiences all around the world when the highly controversial film was released in 1974. Hooper's Chainsaw had proved to be something of an outlier. Marketed squarely as a hyper-violent, take-no-prisoners exploitation film targeting a primed drive-in audience, and yet the film was also actually widely critically lauded, especially internationally, and many high-minded film critics even hailed it as something of an avant-garde art house film, and the work of a much more erudite and intelligent filmmaker than one might expect from the film's unfairly and yet nearly instantly repellent reputation. In fact, the highly charged atmosphere surrounding the film propelled the micro-budgeted Texas Chainsaw Massacre into a word-of-mouth smash hit, grossing well over $30 million during its original theatrical rollout release. The film also became something of a socially charged conversation starter, if you claimed in mixed company to have actually seen, or better yet, endured the film in a darkened theater. Not since William Friedkin's The Exorcist had been released the year prior, had there been an American film that had engaged and enraged audiences in such equal measure. Yet director Tobe Hooper was absolutely the dead opposite of what you might expect the director of The Texas Chainsaw Massacre to be. With a warm, soft-spoken drawl and a mercurial, playful wit, Hooper often won over those who would prejudge him as some sort of sadistic savage, based solely on the notoriety of his contentious horror debut. Yet time and time again, Hooper would surprise especially his most ardent detractors with his trademark intellect, hard-scrabble passion, and candid lack of, well, bullshit. Tobe Hooper was a Texan first, filmmaker and artiste second, much more laconic than iconic, and a seeker and dark dreamer through and through. Much like his contemporaries, Carpenter, Cronenberg, and Romero, Tobe Hooper proved he had his finger firmly on the pulse of the American zeitgeist, and he was ready to use the horror genre as a sharp implement to pierce its jugular and let it bleed for everyone to see. Nearly a decade after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was unleashed, Tobe Hooper had craftily parlayed his horror maverick status to land a potentially financially lucrative 3-picture deal with Israeli mini-moguls Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus's Cannon Films. In 1979, Hooper directed the 2-part CBS miniseries adaptation of Stephen King's Salem's Lot, which categorically terrified American television audiences and led the Nielsen ratings both of the nights it aired in November of that year. A few short years later, in 1982, Hooper captured audiences' attention once again in a big way by directing and co-producing the supernatural summer thriller smash hit Poltergeist, along with none other than Steven Spielberg. And while that film had a very well-publicized, turbulent production, it ultimately proved to be a huge critical and commercial success, grossing well over $120 million. With Chainsaw and now Poltergeist behind him, Hooper convinced Golem and Globus to pony up an astonishing $25 million for what would become their first collaboration together at Cannon Films. This massive budget became a financial windfall for Hooper, which would provide almost unlimited creative resources to produce and direct what would be a wildly imaginative and quite technically auspicious adaptation of Colin Wilson's The Space Vampires. The eccentric science fiction film was wisely retitled Lifeforce, and was inspired by the lavish Hammer Quatermass films that Hooper adored during his youth. And it was backed by an apocalyptically charged and ever-evolving screenplay by genre stalwart Dan O'Bannon. And its overwrought production was every bit as chaotic and creative as Hooper's previous film sets had been legendarily reported to be. Hooper's idiosyncratic mind and widely reported cocaine use tended to somehow both speed Hooper up, just as it would slow filming down, sometimes to a dead stop, as Hooper would obsess over what many others saw to be meaningless details. Hooper worried incessantly that, even though the film featured incredibly virtuosic and trailblazing special effects by none other than Academy Award winner John Dykstra, they were making nothing more than a B-movie replete with an A-movie's budget. The film's chances also weren't necessarily helped along by the casting of actor, fellow Texan, and infamous maniac raconteur Steve Railsback in the lead role, opposite newcomer Matilda May, whose own role required the actress to spend nearly the entire film's runtime stark naked. When Lifeforce was ultimately released on June 21, 1985, it was met with both scathing reviews and tepid box office, ending up trounced in its opening weekend by, of all films, Ron Howard's Cocoon. Lifeforce's failure shook Tobe Hooper to the core, and finally convinced him to return to his Texas roots with what would become his next project at Cannon Films, the long-awaited sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. While many critics of Lifeforce think of it as nothing more than an overblown and confusing coke-fueled fever dream, Lifeforce is also undoubtedly one of the most undeniable big swings of that entire era, full of cosmic weirdness, earthly sexuality, and the kind of sheer originality and unforgettable artistic bravado that allows many others, myself included, to feel that the film is a true cult classic that, like Chainsaw before it, is nothing less than the work of a singular artist. And just as Lifeforce was preparing to suffer its own swan song in theaters, 1985 also found the fourth sequel in the Friday the 13th franchise gearing up for its own auspicious release. And for everyone both creatively and financially involved with the fifth Friday, the word of the moment was repetition. Repetition. The imminent March 1985 release of the next Friday sequel would make 5 Friday films in as many years. And just as the series had become a soundly predictable source of profit for its distributor, Paramount Pictures, By the fourth consecutive sequel, the series had also become less a bold trailblazer within its genre, and more a rinse-and-repeat horror confection, equal parts wanton brutality, explicit sexuality, and with the fifth film, what would prove to be an even higher level of artifice, almost on par with the legendary Oscar Matinier's famed Grand Guignol. The fourth Friday sequel would also be the first entry in the highly successful series since the original to be devoid of its central star commodity, the now iconic character of Jason Voorhees. Seeing as how the monstrous masked maniac was ostensibly killed off with aplomb in the memorable climax of the previous film. And while the Friday films were dependable moneymakers from theatrical exhibition, the films were also paving the way for both new ancillary revenues via merchandising, all while expanding the audience's theatrical experience with novel gimmicks like 3D and the series' trailblazing episodic storytelling style. And yet, these tremendously mainstream horror films, which consistently reached millions of cinema-goers, still essentially had to lure young on-screen talent to audition for the productions by means of near subterfuge, literally aiming to trick actors into appearing in the subsequent Friday films. The production had to literally obfuscate the true title of the film they were holding auditions for, just to potentially lure acting talent to the storied shores of Crystal Lake, to inarguably be essentially stripped naked and butchered on screen in less than lamentable fashion by a hulking masked maniac that fans literally cheered for in the sanctity and safety of darkened theaters all around the globe. However, even with a somewhat flagging industry reputation, the Friday franchise remained a very well-oiled machine, and the series counted many influential people consistently back-channeling its potential continued financial viability. One of the most enduring of these was none other than original 1980 Friday the 13th co-financier Phil Scuderi, who had been intimately involved with the evolving series from the very beginning, and who guided more of the series' history than people may truly give him credit for. From the proverbial shadows, Phil Scuderi had brought together much of the top-tier talent that had made the Friday films so perennially successful. For Friday 5, Scuderi recommended to newly minted Friday producer Timothy Silver that Friday 3 screenwriter Martin Kitrosser be brought back to the fold to newly expand upon ideas he had originally pitched for Part 3. These ideas, once meant for the character of Ginny from the second film, were now transitioned to fit the evolving character of Tommy Jarvis from the final chapter, who would be returning to once again face the cursed horrors of Crystal Lake. Scuderi had also taken notice of director Danny Steinman's 1984 cult film Savage Streets, starring Linda Blair, and quickly brought him to the attention of producers Frank Mancuso Jr. and Timothy Silver for the chance to helm the quickly crewing fifth film. Steinman, who cut his teeth riding the line between low-budget horror and outright hardcore pornography, with films like High Rise in 1973 and The Unseen in 1980, subsequently hired on his friend and previous collaborator, screenwriter David Cohen, to punch up Kitrosser's screenplay, aligning it more with Steinman's ribald sensibilities that the director hoped would titillate as much as it would terrify. Filming on the fifth Friday, promisingly subtitled A New Beginning, commenced in September of 1984, amazingly only a mere 6 months after the previous entry had premiered in theaters. And shooting on Friday 5 lasted for a total of 33 absolutely debauched and drug-fueled days, taking place in and around the scenic and serene area of Thousand Oaks, California. As with Part 2, there would be 2 actors who would portray quote-unquote Jason throughout the movie. That is, until the Agatha Christie-esque climax, reminiscent of the first film, which revealed that the film's trademark kills were the work of a murderous and vengeful paramedic named Roy Burns, who had taken on the Voorhees mantle after his own son had been viciously murdered at Camp Crystal Lake. The part of Roy, the homicidal EMT, was played by actor Dick Wyand. However, the sequences in which Roy carries out the murders disguised as a masked Jason Voorhees would be performed by veteran stuntman Tom Morga. Actor and stunt performer Johnny Hawk also appeared in the film as Jason Voorhees in the opening dream sequence because Morga was unavailable when the scene was shot. Hawk also performed as Voorhees during some additional stunt photography as well. The special effects on Friday the 13th Part 5 would be supervised this time around by yet another returning Friday vet, Martin Becker, who had worked on the previous 2 sequels and who would loyally remain with the franchise up through 1989's Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Finally, on March 22nd, 1985, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning was released into theaters across America, and fans of the stalwart horror franchise turned out in predictable droves to support the series' so-called New Beginning, with or without Jason Voorhees at its bloody center. And while the overall box office haul was not as robust as the final chapter, the film still recouped well over $21 million against a paltry $2 million budget. In its review of The Fifth Friday, the New York Times stated, quote, "Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, set in a bucolic halfway house for disturbed children, is not entirely without grand guignol humor, but almost. It appears to have been paced by a metronome. A joke followed by a murder, followed by a joke, followed by a murder. Perhaps worth recognizing only as an artifact of our twisted culture." Unquote. And there is still so much more for us to deep dive into as our journey through the Friday the 13th film series continues here with our deep dive fan commentary exploration of this, the Fifth Friday, a turning point for a series that tested its core viability just as the slasher subgenre itself began to inarguably ebb in popularity. This is the history, legacy, and lore of Danny Steinman's 1985 slasher sequel, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, otherwise known as Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. And Joe, here we are, 27 episodes into Haddonfield Radio, and I bet you can guess the question I'm about to ask you, Joe. What do you generally think of Friday the 13th, A New Beginning?
I love it.
Oh, wow.
Wait, it bugs me. No, wait, I love it.
Oh,
no,
wow.
Wait, it bugs me. No, really. And I think that's kind of like,
Right.
how the fans are. You either love it or you hate it. Obviously there's a reputation this film has for, I don't know, being the one that a lot of fans really have problems with. I don't quite have that type of disdain for it. I enjoy it. It's obviously got some problems, but in a weird way, I think it sort of embodies the Friday the 13th sort of spirit the most in a way. I mean, like you talked about, it's the closest to the original. People like to complain there's no Jason in it, but hey, there wasn't in the first one either, and you know what I mean? But there is plenty of Jason in it if you really think about it.
If
you know what I mean?
If you were seeing this movie on opening night, on the Friday night in March of 1985 when it opened, you wouldn't have actually known till the end of the movie that it wasn't Jason you were watching.
And
you
even-
might be confused as how it could be Jason,
Right.
but Jason is certainly, quote-unquote Jason at least, is certainly all throughout this film.
Right. And Tom Morgan even said, like, he didn't play it like Roy pretending to be Jason. He just played Jason.
Right, which
What-
I think
you
was
know
a
what I
very
mean?
smart move.
So, and you have the flashback or the dream sequences, and then, you know, like we said, the way Tom is playing it, it's there's plenty of Jason.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? In a weird way. It's but it is a clunky movie.
Yep, yep.
Like technically, but I feel like some of that is unfair to judge because of the MPAA just
They
completely
eviscerated this movie.
Oh, they like re-edited it basically.
Yes.
They made them cut out so much that you know, you got to wonder how it would have flowed if they had left the kills in the way they were supposed to be and whatnot.
I think that the Motion Picture Association under Jack Valenti at that time, obviously, as we've discussed in previous episodes, clearly had a cross to bear with the slasher subgenre as a whole. Mm-hmm. And the Friday the 13th films by that point had become really the kind of the peak of that pyramid, and therefore probably had the brunt of the restrictive qualities put against it, like you were just saying. Mm-hmm. But I think in the fifth film, the MPAA butchered this film.
I think it's kind of widely regarded as the one that got hit the hardest out of the franchise, or one of them. But they 9 times they had to go back.
Wait, they had to go back to the MPAA nine times.
They would go to
Wow.
them, they would suggest something, they'd make the cut, they'd go back, and it took them 9 times of doing that before they were happy with, you know.
That really speaks volumes right there.
Right.
I mean,
at a certain I'm not saying
point,
Danny Steinman is like some amazing director and the movie would have been completely different with it. But the feeling you get, some of the clunkiness, you know, with the editing and the flow.
Right. It really wasn't their fault.
Yeah.
They were up against it with the MPAA, and to get a theatrical release in an R rating, you had to play ball with the MPAA. You didn't have, you know, another agency you could reach out to or someone above the MPAA you could reach out to help. You had your arm twisted as a film producer at that time.
And I heard certain people talking about how I think there was like almost a trade-off here and there where if they cut a little more gore here, they'd allow a little more sex there, that type of a thing going on.
Right,
you know?
right. They were like making trades.
Yeah.
Which is
and you know,
really just
Danny Steinman's going to go
almost the corruption in the system.
Danny Steinman's going to go with the more sex over gore any
Right.
day, right? So
I actually think Danny Steinman, the director of Friday 5, to my view, I think he was much more interested in the titillation value of these films than the terror of these films. And I think the New York Times the little bit of the New York Times review I included in my intro, I only included because I think it does make a valid point about the jokiness and the almost comedic style of the Fifth Friday.
Yeah.
That to me feels, certainly when I was watching the film over the course of the last month to prepare for the episode, it almost is a little off-putting.
It's a like black comedy, you know,
Right.
like the way not the Roy, but the other paramedic, you know, leans over and then kind of makes a
snapping his
crack
gum, yeah.
and kind of smile, almost winking at the camera.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so, yeah, I think Danny's strengths are represented in the movie, but they are not what is typically the focus for a Friday the 13th film. Yes, there is always some sex and this and that, but like where the other directors would say, no, you know, just because you're having sex or doing drugs, that's not why you're getting killed, or doesn't mean you're definitely going to get killed. Well, with Danny Steinman, it is.
Right.
Like, yep, you know, they're having sex or they're going to get killed. And he says that, like, when you
I
listen
think
to his
Steinman
commentary.
and his screenwriters, Katrasser and Cohen,
Yeah.
they sort of boiled, by the fifth film, they were able to sort of boil down the series into its distillate parts and the sex, the violence, and they just sort of turned the volume up on those two things during the course of the production, the writing, and the crafting of the film.
Well,
of course, it, like you mentioned, it bit them in the ass when they had to turn the film in 9 different times, as you said, to the MPAA, and a lot of the sort of appeal of the film was excised from it, leaving audiences feeling a bit unfairly cheated. And yet, I would say that much like Halloween 3, I think this film has had very much of a fan turnaround in appeal as the decades have gone on. Of course, Joe and I are recording this episode in April. It's only April 1st of 2025. March of 2025 was actually the 40th anniversary of this film, coincidentally.
Just happened, yep.
And so, over the course of the last 4 decades, I don't know if you would agree, but I feel like fans have sort of really come around to appreciate this film in its own way, based on its own merits, and certainly probably have come to understand everything that these filmmakers had working against them, not least of which not having their lead commodity of Jason Voorhees anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it like, I think there's the way people felt about it when it came out. And you can kind of understand some disappointment happening more on that end because of the kind of spectacle of going to a movie back then, and you go and you think you're getting another Jason and it's not. And then there's sort of maybe how a fan would think about it watching it now in more modern times, and with being able to watch the franchise as a whole kind of right away, it probably has less of that disappointing feeling,
as time has passed.
You know, or even if you just weren't part of that, old enough to see it back then, and you're just there. I think there's a difference between walking out of the theater that night and sort of talking to somebody who had just felt like they got gypped, and then somebody now who just, people are a lot more forgiving of quirky horror movies.
Of course.
Low budget horror has become its own almost genre that people seek out, and those movies are always a little clunky and whatnot. In terms of Zito, you were talking about him ramping things up a little bit. With the kills.
Danny Steinman, are you talking about?
Oh yeah, I would say Zito.
We're talking. Joe's still on the final chapter.
Let's go backwards. Yes, Danny Steinman. But it was really kind of Scuderi who directed him. He gave him 2 big notes, and that was to make sure if there was a kill or a jump scare like every 7 or 8 minutes. And I think the film actually averages to have one actually like every 4.5 minutes.
It has the highest body count up to that point.
And then the other thing was to make Tommy become Jason. So there's also that factor here. This movie sort of represents a storyline that ends up sort of going nowhere.
Right.
Which was based on the response. People wanted Jason. They were gonna keep making a sequel. The sequel to this was originally gonna still have John Shepard as Tommy Jarvis, and even Melanie Kinnaman was gonna come back. It was gonna be a direct sequel to this.
What would have been the 6th film?
And it was supposed to really set up Tommy. Yep. But then the fans were like, no, we want Jason, and then they come up with their new thing.
It's funny. I think one of the most profoundly fascinating aspects that really has cemented in my mind, and something that I never really noticed or thought about in all the years that I've enjoyed these movies, is what a huge influence Phil Scuderi actually was on all of these films.
I was surprised to keep hearing, well, the Boston guy said this, the Boston guys decided that.
Has had more to do with the success of these films up through the 5th film than almost really anybody.
Yeah.
If you really look at
it. He's like the Oz, the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's so funny. When we were gearing up to start this season, my mind was completely stuck on this notion that I want to make the point that Tom Savini ultimately is the progenitor of Jason and the father of Jason. And I still hold to that. But one thing that has really grown in esteem in my mind is Phil Scuderi's amazing contributions to this series.
Mm-hmm.
He brought so many of the directors and screenwriters to the attention of the Mancusos, and this time to producer Timothy Silver's attention, as well as Frank Mancuso Jr., who had taken a little bit of a step back at this point.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I do think you have to point out, as much as Scuderi was pulling a lot of strings, that once, though, you take the Mancuso factor out, which he, on this one, he said, like, look, I'm going to help get the people and get it in on budget and all that, but I'm stepping away. Creatively, it's going to be more, up to the filmmakers and this and that. And once his influence comes out, I mean, you get Danny Steinman. You get this sort of feeling of, this guy's more focused on making a porn than a horror movie.
Yeah.
And Mancuso was not digging Steinman. He called him a pervert in certain interviews, and just realized like their values were not aligned, but he did try to give people their chance and have faith and let them do their thing.
Hey, look.
And there's the difference, right? As soon as he steps away, you get the movie that most people consider to be the worst one. And Danny Steinman, I think it's also, you should point out, you got to wonder who would have really actually directed this movie if Scuderi sort of owed him a favor. Danny Steinman was originally picked to direct the sequel to Last House on the Left.
Oh, wow.
There's even like a teaser poster for it with saying, directed by him, if this is going to be coming out. And then all of a sudden, Scuderi and his partners, they find out that they don't actually own all the rights to the movie, and they can't put it out. And so that's when they kind of go, all right, sorry about that, Danny, but we can give you, this Friday the 13th movie. So you got to wonder, you know what I mean? Because you got to think about the directors. You have Cunningham. He starts the whole thing, and so it sort of sets the template. And then you get 2 movies with Steve Miner, who's a good director.
Who's solid,
you know what I mean?
very solid
Even
director.
though that was early in his career.
Who in Miner really set up a lot of the architecture stylistically that would go forward throughout the series.
Yeah. And then you have Joseph Zito, who's a solid horror guy.
Exploitation horror director, right?
Right.
Yep.
And then now you're picking Zito, who's specialty.
Steinman. You keep saying
Steinman.
Zito.
and then you have Steinman, who's it's no secret that he likes making more sexually charged movies, right?
I mean, he had made films that were theatrically exhibited and straightforward R-rated films, but he had also literally made hardcore pornography.
Right.
He did a film in 1973 I mentioned in my intro called High Rise that is literally porn.
Yeah.
But he also made a couple of other horror films of which he took his name off of. The Unseen in 1980 was one of them. So he was a complicated person who had a lot of substance abuse issues.
The coke was flowing on this movie.
And let's be fair. In 1985, coke was flowing everywhere.
That's what he says.
It wasn't just on this movie set or just in the horror movie.
No, but you are the director
arena
of a major motion picture for Paramount Pictures. You think
but
maybe,
I would easily argue that probably 70% of all the film sets in 1985 of all different genres of film had cocaine use going on. It became almost like a working man's drug in the 80s, and something that would keep people moving and keep people going. But that's sort of why I wanted to bring up Tobe Hooper and Lifeforce in the introduction.
Yeah.
Because at the same time, you have these 2 projects kind of parallel with very similar sets and very similar stumbling blocks on those sets, starting with their directors. And yet, to me, one of these films ends up arguably a classic, Lifeforce, and in another, Friday the 13th Part 5, kind of just gets lost in the shuffle of its own series at that time. It's odd to me that Friday 5 ends up making only half of the box office of the final chapter.
Yeah, it's right in the middle in the whole franchise, sort of. I mean, excluding like the remake and Freddy versus Jason, out of that main sort of run, it's right in the middle. But a lot of that money that this movie made, it's that factor where it's really being made off of the previous film.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Because people like that and they want to go see more. So a movie like that will make profit before the reviews start to make it kind of go down,
right?
And people start. The word is that it's disappointing. So,
and you know what?
I mean, yeah, it made decent money, but
ultimately, the Mancuso's grand experiment of the Friday franchise, creating a series that behaves much more like episodic television than a film series, in that every year you predictably and dependably are going to get another entry, another episode, so to speak, in the series, and each episode builds off the previous mythology and previous events, and builds off the sort of currency of impact in society that the previous films have had, and yet what's interesting about the first 5 Friday films is I would argue that you could have jumped in at any one of these films without seeing any of the previous films and still essentially enjoyed the experience as a top-tier slasher product.
Yeah.
You know, so I think the films, if you look at them as their success rate being based on what they are, and what they were intended to be, even up through the 5th film, I would say the Friday the 13th series, even with slightly diminishing box office returns in the 5th film, it was still operating at top level. It was operating at a predictable and dependable level. I just think
it's just, you know what, it's mediocre.
That's a good word for it.
It's not horrible.
No.
It's not great. It's got great parts, and it's got horrible parts. You know what I mean? So it's just, it does some weird things. Like you talk about, you like big swings, but I don't know if this is a big swing.
I would not call this a big swing.
When you know, the idea of when you have certain vignettes almost in the middle of it with characters that have nothing to do with anything, just to get the kill count up. You know what I mean?
Well, Steinman did one really great thing for this film. I mean, he did a few, but one of the great things he contributed to this film was he upped the ante in terms of the characters, the dynamic, different kinds of characters that Jason, quote-unquote Jason, could pick off during the runtime of the film.
We don't have the big group of teenagers going to vacation at the lake.
Of camp counselors. Yeah. It was a pretty wide array of different kinds of characters, some cartoonish, let's be honest.
Well, the whole point is it's a group of troubled kids. It's that sort of Nightmare 3
exactly.
effect, right?
I was thinking that same thing.
Instead of it just being kids, there's still sort of counselors in the way, the two people running the halfway house. You know, there's still that element. And
I thought it was interesting. In the last episode, I mentioned how I thought it was interesting the way Tommy Jarvis in the final chapter sort of or I should say, Danielle Harris's character of Jamie Lloyd in Halloween 4 sort of emulates the Tommy Jarvis character in the final chapter. And I found it interesting that going forward, the way they evolve Tommy Jarvis for the 5th Friday ends up being extremely similar to the way the Jamie Lloyd character evolved for Halloween 5. Yeah. Did you notice that as well?
Right.
And it keeps making me wonder if the Halloween films' storytelling and narratives weren't somehow either influenced or casually inspired by the Tommy Jarvis character in these films.
I think it's the same effect, which is the fact that they use different filmmakers, and one guy sets something up based on, you know, what he thinks,
what is his vision,
and what's being talked about with producers.
Right.
Then you bring in somebody else. Plus, they have to take in the feedback of whatever happened from the last movie, and they always switch gears. You got to wonder what would have happened if Corey Feldman wasn't cast in The Goonies, because you know they say they were originally going to sort of continue on with him,
right?
And I don't know if that means in the way we would think, where he gets to become the killer, like as a kid, because he was still a kid,
which probably wouldn't have flown,
or if there was
just would have been
always going to be a jump forward. But maybe they would have had more of him as a kid, like more of a progression. I know there was a whole different original intro for this movie that was going to be with Corey Feldman.
Wait, different than the one that exists now?
Yeah.
I don't know about this. I would love to hear about
leading up to when Tommy wakes up in the van going to the halfway house as like a older person. Instead of Tommy being young in the woods and seeing Jason come up out of the grave, it was going to be him in the hospital from like after the last movie, and there's all these like deaths starting to happen around the hospital, and he kind of. And people are wondering, you're wondering if it's him because of the way that, that you leave the last movie.
Yeah, right.
And he kind of makes his way down to the morgue. He seeks out Jason's body, and it's down there, and then it like springs to life, and comes at him, and boom, he wakes up out of the nightmare. So you were gonna get this little bit more. It's a dream,
right?
But you're also, they're teasing the audience on the idea that Tommy has become the killer. It feeds into Tommy's nightmare in the setup that he's going to become him when he gets older in this, part 5. But they could only get Corey Feldman for 1 day of shooting. So there was no way they were going to film that.
And I think they actually shot it in
was it in his
backyard?
Or
maybe the neighbor's backyard?
You hear either his backyard or the neighbor's.
Yeah, I've heard it both ways.
Corey actually says the neighbor's, and it's Danny Steinman and others who insist it was his. But yes, that was just his insert shots, not the whole graveyard thing.
It's interesting. When you think of the character of Tommy Jarvis in terms of like fan appeal, I think your mind immediately either goes to Corey Feldman or Tom Matthews from Part 6, who later went on to portray Tommy Jarvis in the incredible Vin DeSanti Never Hike Alone fan films that I just want to say should be considered canon. That's my personal belief. I don't know what you guys think, but that's what I think. But what's interesting to me is I was really blown away in reviewing this movie to get ready for this episode by how good John Shepherd really is in this role. And yet it's like fans either go to Tom Matthews or Corey Feldman. You don't really hear too much conjecture about the John Shepherd era of Tommy Jarvis. And yet I would say he is so intense. I easily can say I think he's the best actor in this film. I think he is incredibly effective in what he's supposed to lend to the narrative.
All right. Well, here, fun fact. I think some of that is the fact that he did prep hard for this because, like you mentioned in the beginning, actors weren't told that they were being cast for Friday the 13th. So he didn't know that before they started shooting. He reads about his character having spent time in a mental hospital leading up to him going to this halfway house. So John Shepherd went and worked at a mental institute for a while, an asylum, to prep for this role. Like, he took this ultra seriously because he didn't think it was going to be some B-level horror movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
All right. So I think I'm not saying he's not a good actor. It wouldn't have been that good. He was
very disappointed.
You can see,
to find out this was actually a Friday the 13th sequel. It never ceases to blow my mind that hungry young actors would turn their nose up at any mainstream theatrical film opportunity. And yet, time and time again, you hear anecdotally a lot of these actors from the Friday films voicing that that's how they felt at the time.
I think some of that's just, in this case, this movie, the main guys like Shepard and even Melanie Kinnaman, but a lot of the other actors said that the day they saw all of a sudden Morga come out as Jason, he actually stopped and just stared at them, and they kept walking, and there was like a bunch of them together, and they're like, oh my God, we're in a Friday the 13th.
Wow.
And they started celebrating.
It's a shocking
and they were like
thing
so excited about it. So it depends, I think, on who you are. These guys who are the leads and getting paid more and blah, blah, blah. They took it very seriously. And so, they were maybe a little disappointed that it was just going to, in their eyes, just be a Friday the 13th.
Let's speaking of cast.
Yeah.
I want to take a minute, and I'm sure you're going to want to do this too. Let's take a minute and talk about one of the real, true legends of the horror space, Tom Morga.
Oh my God.
Tom Morga comes in to portray essentially the imposter Jason in this, but for all intents and purposes, like you mentioned, he is playing Jason Voorhees in this film.
His approach was to be Jason.
Exactly. So let's take it at that face value, and just for conversational, for the rest of the episode, when I refer to, or if you refer to Tom Morga playing Jason, you guys know what we mean, right?
Yeah,
we don't have to keep clarifying.
Because he wasn't credited under the Jason name in the credits.
What was he credited
He's like a
as?
stunt performer.
Wait, it didn't say Tom Morga as because he wasn't Jason.
He wasn't.
Yeah, you're right.
You know what I mean?
Jeez, you're right. That is an interesting idiosyncratic element of how you would credit this movie, considering it is not Jason Voorhees. So that's. But Tom Morga, of course, we covered Tom Morga in our season 1, episode 4, where we talked about, of course, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, where Tom Morga portrays Michael Myers near the beginning of that film when he is the iconic bandage-faced Michael Myers.
Which is a really cool look.
One of my favorite looks of Michael Myers.
Yeah, he's a trifecta. He also played Leatherface in part 2.
It's an incredible resume piece to be able to say, if you were Tom Morga, I've had the ability, in my career I have played Jason, Michael, and Leatherface at one time or another. That is, to me, that is a true horror icon.
And of course, the other big Halloween link for this movie was that the stunt supervisor was Dick Warlock.
My God.
Right? Who was Michael Myers in Halloween 2.
Right. And some really legendary, infamous set photos exist out there that you can find right on our Haddonfield Radio Instagram page, if you dig a little, that show Dick Warlock wearing his complete Halloween 2 costume, including the original mask, posing along with Tom Morga wearing the Jason Voorhees Friday 5 getup. And it's one of the greatest, or I should say it's one of the greatest series of candid photographs, probably from all of horror history.
Well, the best one, though, is there's a photo of them and they take the masks off. And the smiles, you just see if they're buddies.
Well,
you know what I mean?
They were both veteran stunt performers with deep resumes. They were both like Ted White before them, like all of these actors that have portrayed Michael or Jason or Leatherface. These were some of the best stunt performers in the business.
There's a funny fun fact I'm going to bring up during the movie about those two. It just shows kind of what good friends they were at.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
And the other thing you got to bring up is that this movie came out against an absolute, like you like to say, banger of a year for movies. Like,
oh my God.
It didn't really have a chance. You know what I mean? In a weird way of, unless it was going to be a masterful horror movie. The stuff that came out that year was ridiculous.
I just have to say that every single year of the decade of the 80s, as all film fans know, there is not a year of the 80s where you don't have a incredible list of bangers. But 1985, in terms of just films in general, but especially in terms of horror, was another, like you just said, incredible year. Should we shoot through a few of these?
Yes,
just while
please.
Let's jump through that. Why not?
Well, the number one movie was Back to the Future, right? For money and everything else.
That makes sense.
So and then of course the Corey Feldman movie Goonies that we talked about
came out in 1985. You're absolutely right.
Breakfast Club, Brazil. What this movie ran? I don't know. Do you know that movie? Ran.
It was a Japanese film, I believe. I don't know Akira Kurosawa, but I don't know much about it. Shamefully.
Rocky IV, Color Purple, Witness, Commando, Clue.
I was saying to Joe before we started recording, what an illustration of the mid '80s that the number 3 movie of the year in terms of box office was Rambo: First Blood Part 2, and the number 4 movie in terms of box office was Rocky IV.
Yeah.
What an incredible year for Stallone.
Stallone was riding high that year.
Stallone was killing it in 1985. Killing it.
Do you remember After Hours? Do you remember that movie?
That was a Martin Scorsese film with Griffin Dunne.
Yeah.
It, at the time, was sort of considered a miss for Scorsese, but it is now become considered one of his great kind of underrated films.
I remember it's one of those movies like on cable when I was younger, just always on and stuff.
It's funny, After Hours, until recently, I always thought that was a Woody Allen movie.
Oh, weird.
Because it has a very strange kind of meta-textual Woody Allen kind of Purple Rose of Cairo sort of feel to it. So when I finally realized who actually made that movie, I was sort of blown away by that.
And this is the year Purple Rose of Cairo came out as well.
Oh, that's so weird. Yep. That's a strange coincidence.
There you go.
Wait, the Woody Allen movie Purple Rose of Cairo came out in 85?
Yeah.
That's really
It's in
weird.
the top 50.
That's really weird.
Day of the Dead, classic
If
horror.
we're going to talk, let's go through the horror, because we got a bunch
Yeah.
here. The horror
Return of the Living
landscape,
Dead?
oh God, yeah. The horror landscape of 1985 was just, like I said, full of bangers. Let me give you a few of these, okay? This is a film that is widely considered, I guess, a horror film. I don't think I would consider it a horror film. But do you remember that movie, the Frank Rodham movie, The Bride?
Well,
It starred Sting
Yes.
and Jennifer Beals.
Yes.
It was sort of like an alternate kind of Bride of Frankenstein
Right, yeah,
telling.
yeah.
Like almost like a real world-esque Bride of Frankenstein retelling. And it has
With the
Clancy
cool- with the-
Brown playing Frankenstein's monster.
right, but Sting was like the Dr. Frankenstein,
I
right?
believe so.
Yeah, the coolest mad scientist you've ever seen,
listen,
right?
if you guys have not seen The Bride, if you want to see a human being who literally transcends what you would think it means to be a human being, somebody who looks way better than anyone else on Earth in 1985, I guarantee you, if there was someone who was the most beautiful human being alive in 1985, if you just look at the movie The Bride and you see Sting at that exact moment in time, I mean, he looks like he was sculpted by a demigod.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, absolutely gorgeous. You had a great anthology, a Stephen King horror anthology film that followed up from 1982's Creepshow. It wasn't connected to Creepshow. It was probably based off of Creepshow's success that it existed. Remember that movie Cat's Eye? And it was a series of short. It had Drew Barrymore was very young. She was in one. There was like a little gremlin that was coming out of like a little mouse hole in the wall to torment her. There was an episode. I believe James Woods is actually in that movie. There's maybe I'm wrong about that, but there's like 4 or 5 little vignette horror anthology stories. A lot of people actually haven't seen Cat's Eye. I bring up Cat's Eye to people, and some people look at me with a blank expression, like they don't even know what I'm talking about.
Am I misremembering? Is that one of the stories has the cat that sits on the chest?
That's like the title story.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
And it sucks the soul out or something.
And I've always wondered if that is where that original old wives' tale that you can't have a cat around a baby because the cat will steal the baby's breath, quote unquote. That's a little strange, idiosyncratic idea that has always haunted my psyche.
Maybe it was like the sort of premise for the thing,
maybe
and
that's
then
why
it built off
that's
of it. You know?
more likely what it was.
Yeah.
Is that the Stephen King short story was
That's
based
what I
on
always
that
thought.
premise.
They were messing with that old idea.
Because that old idea, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, that idea used to really chill my blood.
It's the only thing I remember from the movie.
Yeah, right. Now, you couldn't have a year in the 1980s without a Wes Craven movie. We've talked about that in previous episodes. Wes Craven literally made a movie or two every single year of the 80s. And this year, he released a TV movie he directed called Chiller. Don't know much about it. I'm going to have to look into it, but there was a Wes Craven film for every year of that decade. How about the William Malone film Creature? First off, it had a VHS cover that, much like the film DEFCON 4, I used to be so obsessed with in my childhood. I used to go into Video Paradise, my local hometown video store, and I would pick up that William Malone movie Creature and just stare at that box cover. And it was sort of like a schlocky Alien ripoff, but again, had this extremely cool practical creature at its center that made the film stand out.
Don't know that one.
And William Malone sort of has a lot of currency in the horror genre as a director in and of himself and as a character amongst like the masters of horror from the 80s and 90s. Interesting director who's made some kind of smaller films over the years, really good. Of course, how can you talk about 1985 without talking about my personal favorite zombie film of all time, George Romero, and I always say this, George A. Romero and Tom Savini's Day of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
I consider Day of the Dead to be not only the greatest George Romero zombie film, but I think it is the gnarliest, most brutal, most, zombie film ever made. And it has what I consider Tom Savini's greatest work of his entire career. I think And Savini at that time, he always had these incredible special effects artists that would go on to be superstars themselves, working underneath him on a lot of these sets in the 80s. On this one, he was replete with, of course, Greg Nicotero, who got his start with George Romero.
Yeah.
George Romero literally guided Greg Nicotero's career as a young man, and he got to work under Tom Savini on Day of the Dead. And in the effects, the practical gore effects and just practical effects created for Day of the Dead, the zombie effects, the zombies actually looked like true zombies in Day of the Dead, where in Dawn of the Dead, they sort of just look like gray, face-painted dead people, right?
Yeah.
Because the zombies were just rising from the grave, so they weren't exactly rotted yet.
Yep.
But by day, they're a little more disheveled looking, a little more like a traditional zombies. The opening of Day of the Dead, the incredible music, the incredible synth music in that film, one of my favorite scores of all time. I don't know, what do you think of that film? Do you love Day of the Dead?
Oh, yes. I prefer Dawn of the Dead.
I think most people do.
Yeah.
Even I think I've even
more
heard
for
George
nostalgic
Romero.
reasons. It was just the first zombie movie I saw as a kid. It freaked me out. It's just I've got an attachment to it.
The funny thing is, along the line, George Romero has said, the thing about I've noticed over the years, this is what George was saying, and I'm paraphrasing, is that a lot of the real creeps that he would meet across fandom of his films would always say like, "Oh, I really love Day of the Dead." He's like the real cellar dwellers, and of course that's us. Well, it's always been my favorite.
Yeah.
I know while Day of the Dead is the most violent of all his films, strangely enough, I find it by far the most comforting of all. I absolutely adore that film.
Yeah.
So let's continue on.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what a banger! Fright Night by Tom Holland. What a classic that is. One of my favorite films from the 80s, one of the greatest horror comedies of all time, which we've talked before is a incredibly hard balance between horror and comedy. And it's also an incredibly hard thing to sell to an audience.
But it's also very common in horror to have comedic elements.
Yes, absolutely. But I'm talking about a true kind of duplicitous film that's a little bit of
comedy,
both.
yeah.
Where you could kind of almost look at Fright Night in some ways almost as like a black comedy as well as a horror film.
Yeah.
And
that's a lot like this movie, Part 5.
Yeah, very much so, actually. How about Ghoulies? Remember Ghoulies?
Oh, my God, yes.
Now, of course, after Gremlins, there was a slew of little violent creature films like Ghoulies, like Critters, all the rest.
Gate. Was that...
The Gate theoretically would count because of that iconic scene from The Gate where the monster becomes all those little creatures, or all these little creepy crawly creatures. But I absolutely love the original Ghoulies film. I don't love those films as much as I love like Critters 2 or the two Gremlins movies, but they are fun films nonetheless. They're like the C movie or D movie version of Gremlins. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have Lifeforce, which I talked about in my intro, a movie that has become a classic decades later, and even spawned a sequel decades later. Have you ever heard of this film from 1985, The Mutilator? It was a slasher film.
I don't think so.
From 1985 that sort of got lost in the shuffle when it was originally released, but obviously through VHS and through ancillary markets, it grew in esteem as a cult film over the years, all the way up to the point where there was a crowd-funded sequel called The Mutilator 2 that I believe was released in 2023 with the same director. It was like he had achieved a dream he had had for like nearly 40 years, trying to continue this storyline that and I've always thought The Mutilator is such an awesome title.
It does sound...
It's a great title,
I don't know
is
how
it
I missed
not?
that one, yeah.
I think a lot of even kind of deep bench horror fans may have missed. I'll be honest with you guys. I've never seen The Mutilator. I'm going to rectify that. I've never seen it.
It must not have had like a cable run, because in those days...
this was a super small movie that sort of just grew as a cult kind of curiosity. So let's continue on. Talk about a big hit. Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 the Jack Shoulder sequel. Of course, not as big of a hit as the original Nightmare,
Right.
but certainly a
big movie.
fascinating metatextual film. If you guys want to know a lot more about Joe and I and the way we think about Nightmare 2, well, of course, we did an entire episode on it. Our second second episode of season 2. You can go check that out, and we talked for 3 hours about that movie. Am I right?
Yes.
I want to talk about the next film on my list from 1985 because it is a film that categorically scarred me when I saw it as a child.
Oh, boy.
I couldn't have been more than 10, 11, 12 when I first saw it.
That's what happened to you?
This might be part of it. This movie, it's Dario Argento's Phenomena. And it had a very... It stars a very young, it may have been her first film, I could be wrong about that, Jennifer Connelly.
Yeah.
And it's the story of this little girl, and I'm paraphrasing here. It's a very strange film, of course. Most of Dario Argento's films are super hard to kind of condense down into a one-sentence descriptor. But it's about this young girl who has this strange magical connection with insects. But I know the film also is about this serial mass murderer who is keeping all these body parts in this watery pit in the basement of a house or a building, and eventually Jennifer Connelly gets thrown into that pit that's full of maggots and body parts. And I have to tell you, I can't remember the straightforward full through line of the narrative of this film, and I'm looking at the screen now. I guess it was
Pleasance was
it was
in
originally I guess called Creepers.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at on the poster.
Or maybe it was retitled Creepers.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
But I know this film as Phenomena.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, while I can't fully remember the film, it's because I have been terrified to watch it in the subsequent decades because it scared me so badly when I was a kid. And yet I always remember sequences from the film being shown during, and I hope you guys might be able to help me with this out there listening, a lot of like the super knowledgeable fans of horror out there. There was a television show that was on, it had to be in the 90s. It was on the USA Network. It was hosted by Robert Englund, and it was like a horror movie clip show. And it would be on like Saturday afternoons on the USA Network, where Robert Englund would sort of just guide you entertainingly through clips of horror films.
Yeah.
And it was like a 2-hour episode. And I want to say maybe it was called like Welcome to My Nightmare or something like that. But it was hosted by Robert Englund and it was on the USA Network. Do any of you guys out there know what I'm talking about? Or am I having a coke-fueled fever dream?
I wouldn't doubt it.
If you
I'm
know,
sorry.
like sometimes I don't like to Google things. I like to find things out organically. If you guys know this show I'm speaking to, if you guys had experiences with that USA Network Robert Englund clip show, let me know, because it was a big part of my horror fandom as a teenager, that show.
Yeah.
And they used to have these clips of Dario Argento's Phenomena throughout those episodes. And so I remember those clips in that body pit very vividly. And so I would love to know if you guys know anything about that, because I've always kind of wondered about that Robert Englund series. I've got another just all-timer to talk about. Stuart Gordon's Reanimator.
Oh, God.
Now, I have to say, while I prefer his film From Beyond, Reanimator is by far, I think, much more of a stone cold classic in the horror genre.
It's just it screams 80s horror.
It's another one that's sort of a horror comedy. Well, it has a lot of very comedic elements, not least of which is Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West. Jeffrey Combs' entire performance as that character is as kind of for the back row as possible, so to speak. You know, he's like as broad and as big as you can do it when he plays Herbert West, to beautiful effect. I absolutely love his performances as Herbert West. And I think the Reanimator films, the From Beyond, a lot of Stuart Gordon's earlier works are really good gateway films if people want to kind of get into H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh yeah, sure.
And maybe feel a little off-put by the language of the original novels, and you want to experience the Lovecraft side of horror movies, well, the Stuart Gordon films of that era are a beautiful place to start. I'm just noticing right now, one of the films from 1985 was Lady Hawk.
God, I love that movie.
Boy, I
really
wish more
love that
people
movie.
loved that movie.
Is it really? Oh yeah, it's kind of like one.
Listen, I think
one
that
star.
movie was probably one of the early adopters of PG-13, and I think that might have thrown off audiences a little bit, like family audiences that might have gone to see a movie like that in 1985.
Yeah.
And so I know it was basically a box office failure, and yet what an incredibly unique and fascinating fantasy film that is. You have Rutger Hauer, an early, if not the first performance by Michelle Pfeiffer, in one of the best performances of Matthew Broderick's
Right.
career.
It's got to be early for him too.
It has to be.
Right.
It may be
I mean,
one of his first films as
he's
well.
like almost a kid in it, you know.
In Rutger Hauer in Lady Hawk, he's another one like Sting, for example, that
Yeah.
almost looks like beyond human. He's so just handsome and majestic and movie
Completely
star-ish.
believable in that role, you know.
It's a movie I haven't seen in many
I
years.
know. I see again. So a movie for me, our age, 85. I'm 10 years old. You know, I can't go to a theater, and so all my introduction to a lot of these movies is through cable. And so you know, you don't get a sense of was it a hit, was it a failure. It's just one of the movies that was always on in my youth, and I used to just sit and watch it all the time.
Absolutely, I totally agree. It is such like an iconic film of our exact youth.
Yeah.
And Joe and I are both. You know, I turned 50 this year. Joe will turn 50 as well.
No,
And
I won't.
What are you going to turn 49?
Maybe 50.
Oh, are you?
Maybe 50.
Yeah, that's it. I'm not afraid to say it anymore. I'm 50 now. I'm 50 frickin' years old. For our listeners in the future, I'm 60. I'm 70 or even 80.
I'm dead.
If you're listening to this in the future, we may be dead now.
Oh my
You may be
God.
listening to the voices of dead people. That's strange. That must be surreal. But right now, as we're recording this, I'm 50, and Lady Hawk is one of those films of my youth that is always kind of warmly in my kind of subconscious mind.
In a weird way, another movie this year was Weird Science.
Oh,
we brought
Weird.
up over,
That
and
was also 85.
Oh my God, I
Wow.
love that movie. And I had starred an actress that was in the last Friday the 13th movie, with the black hair, the one that gets killed in the raft.
Oh, interesting. She's also in Weird Science?
Yeah, she's one of the two
Oh.
girls that they're kind of, end up with at the end, the brunette.
It just occurred to me that John Hughes had two major films out in 1985.
Yeah.
Weird Science and The Breakfast Club.
Yes.
Imagine making two films in the same year that not only are both huge hits, huge cultural touchstones,
Yeah.
but both go on to be considered legendary films.
Yeah.
That's
Was
amazing.
Weird Science financial
I think
success?
it was a
Obviously
financial
Breakfast
success.
Club, but
I'm not sure it was to the level of The Breakfast Club.
of course. And it's going down in history, I mean, as one of the greats. Give me the keys, I drive.
I
It's so good.
personally, hey, look, I'll go to my grave arguing the point that I think Weird Science is John Hughes' funniest film of all
I
time.
love it.
I think it's one of the funniest films of the 80s. I think it is a hilarious movie, and the humor in that movie truly holds up. I got
Anyway.
a couple more.
Yes.
Another all-time banger of a zombie film. This was directed by the screenwriter of Lifeforce, which I mentioned earlier in the episode, Dan O'Bannon. Of course, I'm talking about Return of the Living Dead.
Which has two actors from Friday the 13th, Part 5. in it,
Oh my God, I
which
did
I
not
will
know
bring up
that.
as we see them. Yep.
Please do, because that's very interesting
Yep.
to me. Of course, that film is another horror comedy.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
I'm realizing now, man, that was kind of the theme of 1985 in terms of the horror genre, I guess. These kind of hybrid movies, thematic hybrids.
If the MPAA is going to cut down the gore so much in your movies, you have to have some
Wow.
other element that makes people want to go see it.
You know, I have to say, 27 episodes in, I think that's one of the most brilliantly interesting pieces of analysis you've brought to the forefront.
Come on.
That when you just started saying that, I actually felt
kinda
that
makes
strange
sense, right?
physical click that happens in your brain when you're learning something.
You got to give the audience something else that is a guarantee.
How much do you want to bet? That just completely recontextualized my entire idea of Danny Steinman's Friday 5. Perhaps that was part of the idea, to up the comedy, to up that side of the entertaining value, because the gore and horror side of it was being attacked by the MPAA.
You never, if you're going
and,
for
and the titillation through the sexuality.
If you're going for an R rating, you're never probably gonna have to cut a joke or a funny bit ever.
Yes.
So you know.
I got one last one, because I know this is another one that I know is going to really resonate with you. At least I'm guessing it will, because it was a big one of my youth. How about, and again, another Stephen King banger, Silver Bullet.
Oh God.
I still think that Silver Bullet gets completely overlooked in terms of 80s werewolf films for two reasons. It doesn't have a stone cold memorable transformation sequence that became sort of part and parcel of the werewolf films of the 80s, and it doesn't really actually revolve around the characters of the werewolves. The characters of the werewolves are sort of secondary to this family story centered around the character that Corey Haim plays. The kid is in the wheelchair. Gary Busey is his strange, his eccentric uncle. And they are in a town where suddenly there's this mixture of religion and occult that is werewolves.
Yeah.
And I just did an absolutely terrible version of explaining that movie. I will admit that. That explanation of Silver Bullet was horrible.
You got it out there. But yes, I understand what you're saying. It's not the focus.
It's not like...
Yes.
You could almost get away with not saying... You don't have to necessarily think of Silver Bullet as a werewolf film. It is a werewolf film. I guess I'm not being clear.
It's more about people who hunt werewolves.
Well, it's more about...
than werewolves.
It's more about the characters thrust into this supernatural situation, much like a lot of Stephen King stories, where you have normal, everyday American suburban people being thrust into supernatural situations. Whereas something like The Howling, I would say, is a straight-up slam-bam werewolf movie. Okay?
Even
American Werewolf. I would say that. Maybe a lot of you guys are disagreeing with me when it comes to Silver Bullet, and you would be absolutely have a fair degree of measure to do so. A lot of incredible horror films and just movies. I even noticed Enemy Mine.
That's what I was going to say. Look at those three right there. Cocoon, Enemy Mine, and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Again, movies I watched ad nauseum on cable as a kid, over and over and over again.
It's funny you brought that up, because a lot of these movies, you're absolutely right. I wonder if 1985 is around the time that cable pay was starting to become much more prevalent in the homes of normal American citizens.
I can pinpoint when, it was 1984. My school year of 84, 85, that I remember my parents getting cable.
So that makes complete sense. Which is why a lot of these films were actually probably more viewed through that spectrum than maybe
that's
even
what I mean.
VHS.
I don't have a sense of what were hits or not. These were just movies that were always on in my youth. Real Genius, Mask, there's so much Legend.
Look at we have James Bond, A View to a Kill. You have Kiss of the Spider Woman,
Return to Oz,
Prizzi's Honor with Jack Nicholson, Brewster's Millions with John Candy and Richard Pryor.
Spies Like Us. I loved Spies Like Us.
Spies Like Us was 1985.
Yeah.
One of my favorite movie-going memories was going with my mom and dad to see Spies Like Us at Foxborough Movie Theater. I vividly remember the audience in that screening. People were laughing uproariously at that
so
movie.
Good. When they get off the spinning flight simulator and it's so good.
Oh, wow, that's a John Landis movie.
Yeah,
I did not realize that. Yeah. And also another film that's very kind of body and very like full of sexuality. And I remember I was probably way too young for probably 60% of the jokes.
Yeah.
But you know when the adults are laughing, so you're laughing because you want to sort of acclimate yourself to the adult sensibility.
When they go in and take the test, and Chevy Chase has got the fake arm and the eye patch, and he's trying to cheat. And that was also the movie where I first became aware of Frank Oz as just an actor. He plays the teacher in that scene, and I knew of him as Yoda. I knew he did all that, but also I'm like, oh, he just will act too. You know, as a kid, I was just figuring all this out. It was cool. It was. I really like that movie.
I just completely forgot Frank Oz was in that movie.
Yeah.
You know,
anyway,
before we do jump into the movie, though, I wanted to talk about something because when I have always thought about Friday 5, there's a certain kind of tradition, both in cinema and in the real world. And tradition is not really the right word, but a certain kind of a landscape you can look at it through, or a prism you could explore it through. Friday 5 to me is not only a perfect bridge between these two eras of Jason Voorhees' story. I've talked about this in previous episodes. You have era number 1 that goes from Friday, and this is just my own subjective way of looking at this franchise. I see era 1, which I call the life of Jason Voorhees, as Friday the 13th, 1980, up through the final chapter, where his human form theoretically dies.
Yep.
Then you have this bridge, which is Friday A New Beginning, that leads you into the second era that I personally call the living death of Jason Voorhees. That starts with, of course, Jason Lives and goes up through, I guess, Jason X. Even though, as I've said before, the mythology gets a little bumpy and rocky around the Jason Goes to Hell, right?
Yeah.
But still, for the sake of argument, you can group those as a second era. But another way that you can look at Friday the 13th Part 5 is as a copycat killer film. Just like Friday the 13th Part 2 can also be looked at, as we talked about in that episode, a sackhead killer film. Outside of being just a part of the Friday the 13th franchise, it also exists as part of that horror legacy. Friday the 13th Part 5 can also be attributed to the copycat killer legacy.
It's a little more of the whodunit aspect.
And the Agatha Christie-esque
right, because they do set up a few red herrings in the movie, and you got to wonder about Tommy the whole time. Again, it's more in spirit of the original movie, where, you know, leading up to finding out it's the mom, where the others, you know, in between, you know it's Jason, you know. And in this one, it sure feels like Jason, and no one really, I guess, has any reason to not think it's him, but they do make you wonder.
Right.
You know?
I think, actually, just as a side note, just to going off what you were just saying, I think the red herrings in Friday 5 are actually even more effective than the ones in Final Chapter. Yeah. I think the red herrings, especially John Shepard's Tommy Jarvis red herring,
of course,
it walks a beautiful line between being overt and being suspectable. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think in a lot of that comes down to both the writing, and mostly I think it's the portrayal by John Shepard, the way he portrays Tommy Jarvis. His trauma, much like a character like Laurie Strode from the Halloween films, or even Jamie Lloyd, as we mentioned previously, is very understandable and relatable. And so his behaviors as the teenage version of Tommy Jarvis make complete sense. And you can completely buy the notion that he could be somehow, demented enough to become a killer himself.
That's the other aspect. You got to remember, he's playing
a copycat killer himself.
Well, he's playing it under the idea that he is going to become the killer by the end of the movie.
Right.
So not only is he dealing with past trauma, but it's also the idea of sort of this spirit, quote unquote, of Jason kind of taking over more and more.
Or the curse.
It goes from him just seeing Jason in dreams in the beginning to, at the end, actually seeing him in the room, and then you see Jason literally just fade away, which is sort of the moment it's now in him,
right?
And then the next time you see him, he's got the mask and the knife, and it's the transformation's over.
I totally agree with that. It's funny when you really do some research into quote-unquote copycat killer movies.
Yeah.
The odd thing is you actually really don't find a lot of films throughout the years that were specifically kind of tailored around that notion. There was a John Avnet film from the 90s that was literally called Copycat that starred, I think it was Sigourney Weaver and Holly Hunter, that explored this kind of territory.
Yeah.
But where you really see this playing out in its most insidious form is actually in our reality, in our real world. Copycat killers, especially based off of horror movies, is actually a very categorical kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Phenomena.
Yeah.
That And I want to really, before I jump into this for a couple minutes, because there's one story in particular that completely chilled my bones this month when I read it. So I want to quickly share it with you guys because it's so eerie. But copycat killers based off of, in real life, that were somehow inspired by horror movies, I just want to say up front, I am completely against, okay, just putting it out there, this notion that movies or video games provoke people into becoming maniac killers or school shooters or mass shooters or any of that. I just think that's nonsense. I think there are just crazy people, and when they're, they can be exposed to certain things, and that can certainly push something along in a dark way. But this way that you can just tie horror movies to these violent events or tie video games to violent events, I think a lot of that is just bullshit, personally. However, that phenomena does exist in our real world. And there was one example, there's a few. Let me just tell you, there's a quick one I'll throw at you. In 2006, Brian Lee Draper and Tori Adamczyk were so inspired by horror, especially the Scream films, that they created a scenario that they filmed all this, where they dressed up like the Scream, like Ghostface, essentially. They wore masks. They didn't dress specifically as Ghostface. They created their own masks and their own costumes, and they went and they murdered a teenage girl in their town, okay? They are now long ago incarcerated forever for this. But they were apparently so influenced by horror that they became demented killers. But this month, I came across a story related to the Halloween franchise that absolutely chilled my blood. Let me just tell you this before we jump on this story. It's really quick. So in 2021, a 16-year-old boy...
I think I know this story. Go ahead. Yeah.
His name was Brian Coey Jr. He had basically seen the 2018 Halloween film and had become so hypnotized, for lack of a better word, by Michael Myers that he became obsessed with horror movies, obsessed with murder, obsessed with darkness, forensics, everything related to true crime. Now, that can be a completely safe hobby for people. But if you are already somebody who's got mental illness or already has some sort of something wrong in their psyche, of course it can be damaging to be invested in dark, material or thoughts. And so in 2021, to make a long story short, one night he literally dressed up in a note-perfect Michael Myers costume that he had put together like a true fan would. Like it was detail perfect. And he went out that night driving around looking for a victim. He is driving under a highway underpass where there's a small homeless encampment. And he immediately, deviously realizes, well, this is the perfect target. So he pulls the Michael Myers mask on. He's carrying a 12-inch kitchen knife. He wanders into the homeless encampment, sees a 60-something-year-old elderly homeless man sleeping under a tarp. This old man has got long, just like you'd probably sadly imagine, with the long, stringy gray hair, the long, stringy gray beard. And he's minding his own business, just trying to survive, sleeping under a highway overpass on a cold night, when Brian Coey Jr. walks up to him, fully clad in masked as Michael Myers, rips the tarp off, and violently attacks and murders this old man. I think his name was Warren Brennan. He then cleans himself up. Well, he then does some horrifying things to the corpse, which I won't get into here. and then cleans himself up, goes home, and continues on with his life. When he was arrested for this crime, they were able to very quickly figure out, because he didn't really cover his tracks, he was demented. And they arrested him, and they brought him in and interrogated him. This kid was so thrilled to be captured, because now he could have the whole experience of being interrogated and becoming infamous as
you
a
watch that
Michael Myers
interrogation footage?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be known as a Michael Myers copycat killer.
He was about as
You've seen
calm.
this?
Yeah. No, I'll have to go back, because one major difference I thought was that they found the costume in his car, but I don't think he wore it when he killed the guy. Maybe I'm wrong.
He claims that he was wearing it. Now,
yeah, I could have had it wrong.
Say,
I know he did have it, and he had that obsession.
I was going to say,
and his interrogation is chilling, because there's obviously there's a total lack of empathy, or that he's dissociated from
you can go
a
on
person
YouTube,
being a thing.
Guys, you can go on YouTube right now, and you can watch the entire interrogation footage. His name, if you want to look him up, is spelled Cohee, Brian Cohee Jr. Now, hold on one second, okay? I agree with you. When I delved into this case this month, because it really caught my attention preparing for this episode about, partially about copycat killers, I got really invested and started really looking into it. I would agree with you. I actually don't believe he was wearing that Michael Myers mask when he killed the guy, because as we've talked about before, when you're wearing an actual mask in real life, it really obscures your ability to do just about anything.
Yeah.
I think he says he was
I know
wearing
the
the
costume was part of the story. I thought it was he had it, they found it.
Well, he claims to have been wearing
But
it.
when you listen to him talk about the way he gutted this guy,
It's horrifying.
He's almost proud.
Oh, he was not almost. He was proud.
And he's happy to tell the story.
He was having.
It's like he has no idea he's about to go to jail for the rest of his life.
It's not only that. I think he didn't even care. He wanted the infamy of being Michael Myers in real life.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that got under my skin.
Yeah.
Not that all the rest of what I've just described didn't get under my skin, because it certainly did.
Yeah.
But I'll admit, I'm somebody who takes in a lot of true crime. I'm a real big fan of the true crime genre. Okay? But what really got under my skin about this case is a connection that occurred to me after the fact. Think about this for a second. 2021 was a full year before the movie Halloween Ends is released into theaters. In the movie Halloween Ends, as we all know, anyone listening to this will know this. A big part of the plot of that movie is about an acolyte, a young teenaged acolyte of Michael Myers, dressing as Michael Myers, where his first victim is an elderly, bearded and stringy-haired homeless man in a homeless encampment underneath a bridge. And even weirder, that character's name is what?
Corey.
Brian Cohee. Corey. Now, wait a minute. You have to really understand something here in terms of the significance of this. This was a year before Corey Cunningham was in a movie as a character that anyone could have known about. Mm-hmm. Last episode, if you remember in my intro, I was talking about how sometimes life imitates art, and sometimes art imitates life in these strange and eerie and sometimes barbaric ways. Isn't that a strange
You got to wonder
connection?
if they...
It's almost like accidentally, Brian Cohee Jr. didn't position himself as being the Michael Myers of our world. What Brian Cohee Jr. actually is the Corey Cunningham of our world.
Who knows what that kid would have done? You bet
if he hadn't been
that
caught?
was his first kill, and if he had gotten away with it, you wonder if once he got used to it, if he would have started then, yes, wearing the mask and more and doing the whole thing up. There
are tremendously significant, grisly, and illuminating details that I am leaving out of this description because, for all I know, there could be younger people listening to this episode.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to keep it safe.
Look up his name if you're interested,
if you
because there's plenty of footage out there of him being interrogated and explaining every detail.
Yes. In a lot of these details of the savagery of this crime, I would actually argue are above and beyond Michael Myers' kind of abilities, or Michael Myers' MO is the better way of putting it. But Brian Coey Jr., to me, when it suddenly occurred to me, and you know me, you guys have listened to this show now for 27 episodes, you know that I'm a person who makes weird connections, and maybe they are exciting connections to me, but everyone else is rolling their eyes, because Joe certainly sort of rolled his eyes, but I thought it was very odd that his name is Coey, and the character is Corey.
I think it's definitely weird that the scene it almost plays out like this. I didn't even put that connection.
Isn't that
that is
spooky?
crazy? Yeah, because it's also like Corey isn't dressed up either at that point, and he just kills him and
it's a highway underpass.
I can't remember. I think it was also in terms of the real event. If it was the same story that actually starts with like footage at the kid's parents' house.
This is because that's the detail I was going to leave out.
Okay.
But you know what? We'll bring it in.
He's got the guy's head in his like bedroom, and his mom finds it. Right.
Brian Coey Jr. took the head off the homeless man, put it in a shopping bag, and brought it home to keep. And I think he had the hands too.
Yeah.
And
the
his mother found it, cleaning his room.
Yeah.
And then the parents have to
call
him. He's out. Brian Coey Jr. is out hanging out with his friends like a normal teenager.
They had to lure him home.
And they had to lure him home to be arrested.
Yeah.
His mother found this homeless man's head in the kids, and this is like a 15 or 16. He had to be 16 or 17.
He's like zits on the face, kind of goofy looking,
and he's very articulate.
He's
very intelligent, well spoken.
He never gets nervous or worked up.
He's super calm in his interrogation.
I think even when the cops find him outside when he finally comes home. And they're just like, why do you think we're here? He's like, oh, did you find something in my room, And
they say, well, why did you have a head in your room? He's like, because I murdered this man.
Yeah.
And his parents are standing right next to him as he's talking to the police.
It's so matter of fact. I mean, clearly the kid has some disconnect,
You think?
I mean...
Joe with the understatement of the millennium.
Listen. This just in, I think he has some serious mental problems.
I also just thought it was so... Now, I just want to say, because maybe some of you are asking this exact question I'm about to mention. Some people might say, well, wait a minute. Was David Gordon Green and his writing team somehow inspired by this true life case, and then they created this character within the next No. Because at the time, I looked it up, at the time that this crime took place, they were just starting to kind of, get ready to... They were filming, actually.
Starting production.
Starting production. So it couldn't have been.
Yeah.
It's just one of those idiosyncratic, serendipitous, dark, bizarre connections where art accidentally imitated life in a very supremely eerie and creepy way. To know that there is an actual Corey Cunningham existing in our world. And thank God they locked him away and threw away the key.
Thank God our real police officers aren't as bumbling as the ones in horror movies and actually catch people sometimes.
Well, really quick before we move on, I would argue that Brian Coey Jr., he desperately wanted to be caught because his idea wasn't so much to be a killer. He wanted to be known as being a killer. And not just a killer. He wanted to be known as Michael Myers of the real world. And yet, accidentally, I would argue he becomes Corey Cunningham.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is even more creepy.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sorry. Maybe I went on too long, but I wanted to share that with you guys because it creeped me the F out.
Let's do some thanks and get to the movie, huh?
All I want to say, you guys
that was
know.
Good stuff. I wasn't expecting that.
Well, I you know what? I had a hard time finding a lot of interesting information about copycat killer movies.
Yeah.
And so when I started just looking at copycat killers associated with horror films, I came across that YouTube video. And there's a really amazing true crime site where you may have seen it called EWU, Explore With Us. If you just YouTube Explore With Us, you will find this channel that has all these incredible police body cam footage cut together with interrogation footage to tell these incredibly eerie and creepy true crime stories on YouTube. I love it.
great.
I'm obsessed with YouTube
yeah.
true crime. Obsessed.
Unfortunately, now when I go to YouTube, like all the things it's recommending is like body cam stuff or interrogations.
What a way to tell true crime stories nowadays on YouTube with using the And what they do is the YouTube content creators, they just FOIA a Freedom of Information request all this information and then edit it and put music and create very compelling videos. Yeah. So anyway, check it out if you like true crime. But anyway, I just want to say something on behalf of both Joe and myself. And even though, and this occurred to me this month, even though we say this every single episode, and even though we take time out of every single episode to share this with you guys, I hope there is never a point where anybody out there thinks that this is just part and parcel and part of one of our episodes where we come out and spend a couple minutes expressing how much we sincerely appreciate and love you guys. I don't want you guys to ever think just because this particular segment happens at this particular part in every episode that it's somehow artificial. It's not. Just last week, Joe and I received one of the most wonderful emails from a German listener named Marius Merton.
It was so heartfelt.
And Joe texted me over the email and said, "You've got to read this email from one of our German listeners who really loves the show. It's got to be one of the nicest things anyone's ever written to us." And you guys are going to laugh at this or giggle at me, but you guys know I'm emotional. But as I was reading it, I actually started to get like tears in my eyes, because just to know that the work we're putting in to create these episodes is comforting to you guys and makes you guys feel happy and gives you guys something fun to focus on outside of the sheer madness of the real world, like, you know, surrounded by people like Brian Coey Jr. If we're creating a show or videos or episodes or whatever you want to call Haddonfield Radio, and it's bringing you any bit of joy in your life or happiness or comfort, you guys just have no idea what that means to Joe and I, because that is our singular pursuit. We're not doing this show to somehow get clout or to make money or to profit off of our listeners. We don't want any of that, and we don't care about any of that. We literally create Haddonfield Radio and have created Haddonfield Radio since the beginning with one objective in mind, and that is creating episodes and videos that are fun and comforting to you guys. Am I right?
Right.
Certainly to the decades of fans of all of these incredible horror films and just movies in general, and the people out there who love to talk about movies and love to listen to yahoos like Joe and I talking about movies for hours and hours at a time. You guys just, I can't stress enough from the bottom of both my heart and Joe's oversized heart that's basically failing at this point. Literally. We sincerely love you guys. And hearing from you guys, whether it be in the comment section or over on our Instagram page and messages or in emails.
Yeah, thank you.
You guys just don't know what it means to us. It makes every bit of the effort we put in to create these episodes worthwhile. And hearing from literally incredibly knowledgeable fans means the world to us, because it helps us to improve our storytelling going forward.
I'm glad you brought that up. I need to make a correction from like 2 episodes ago that a couple of listeners pointed out to me, and I stopped and did my research to see what was going on. So when we were talking about the part 3 in 3D episode, Friday the 13th part 3, with the 3D technology, I talked about having to wear the old school red-blue 3D glasses to see the movie.
The anaglyph.
The anaglyph, right, yes. That is wrong information. That is not what you needed to see the movie when it originally came out, or how it was presented in 3D. When it first came out, you would wear polarized glasses, almost like sunglasses.
I did not know this.
And that's why the movie, when it was being advertised as being sharper and crisper in 3D, is because it didn't have that doubling red-blue effect that you get with traditional older 3D movies. Where that confusion came in when I was doing my research was I kept seeing the glasses, original 3D glasses from 1983 or 2 there when the movie came out, and I just assumed it was for the movie. But what it was that there was a 3D poster that was out in theaters at that time. So you would use the red-blue glasses to view the poster, and even on the back, on the inside, it says, only for viewing the poster. And then there's a second set of glasses that have the polarized thing, and that was for the movie.
I mean, that really blows my mind, and I never came across that detail in my research either.
Yeah.
And there was a listener who pointed this out. Am I right?
Two different ones.
listeners.
Yeah. So my radar definitely went up. Like, okay,
See that?
I think I did something wrong, and or it was just confusion when I saw those glasses. I sort of assumed it was for the movie, but it was for a poster.
And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and this absolutely proves this point. The irony for Joe and I a lot of the time is that the listeners of this show that we are producing, in many cases, probably know more about the movies we're talking about than we do. We're trying to essentially, because we've always said, and it's the truth, we are not experts on any of these films. We are simply fans sharing our fan perspective, hopefully with other fans who have their own. And the comments section is where you can kind of bounce off of that and either share a reflective opinion of your own or course correct some of our information that we may have got wrong. And I'll throw one out and bag myself just because Joe went ahead and did that and braved that, and I'll do it too. Except nobody pointed my mistake out from last episode. And I wonder if that's just because you guys are being polite and nice. But last episode, our final chapter episode, at one point, I said there was that famous scene that Tom Savini had engineered where, the windshield exploding shotgun to head, he shoots the guy in the head with the shotgun through the windshield, and the head explodes in the most incredible fashion. One of the great exploding heads in movie history. Well, in the final chapter episode, I believe I credited that scene as being from the movie The Prowler, the Joseph Zito film. In fact, it's from the film Maniac. Totally got that wrong. Nobody corrected it. Maybe nobody caught that gaffe, but I just wanted to throw myself under the bus because I made that mistake and I wanted to correct it now.
Hey, we all make mistakes.
We all make mistakes. Joe and I just happen to make dozens of mistakes.
Oh,
but we love you guys. Honest to God, getting back to the point.
Yeah.
This is why that comment section means so much to us, because not only do we hear from you guys and get feedback from you guys as to what you're enjoying or what we could be doing better, but we get some course correction, just like Joe pointed out. So all I want to say before we dive into this movie together here in Joe's basement, if you are listening to our voices right now, wherever you are on planet Earth, Joe and I want you to, and my mom also, I'm going to throw her in on this too. Because she's getting fan mail too, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
We all want you to know from the bottom of all three of our hearts that we literally and sincerely love you, appreciate you, and we could not do this without you. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for supporting our creativity here at Haddonfield Radio. This has been one of the happiest periods of my creative life. Certainly, probably the most proud I've ever been of any creative project I've ever been a part of. And Joe and I have had a few over the last 30 years. But what really means the most to me when everything is distilled down to its basic elements is pleasing you guys. That's what means the most to me. And I know it means the most to Joe as well. That's why I can speak for him. all we want to do is create something that is going to make you guys happy. And if we're successful in that thus far, then that makes us happy, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, we love you.
There's no better way to say it.
We love you, and I love you, Wally, and my mom. But yeah, without further ado, I think we should do what we're all here to do. Let's get down to it. We're going to watch and talk about, still a lot to discuss, amazingly enough.
Oh, God, yeah.
Danny Steinman's, or as Joe calls him, Joe Zito's, 1985 slasher sequel, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, otherwise known as Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. Which one do you prefer, Joe?
I like the Part 5.
See, I like, just like Friday the 13th, the final chapter, I like Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. I like that, but that's just, I'm glad we disagree. We both have one vote for each one of them. So anyway, we love you guys. We're going to jump in on the movie. Without further ado, anything else you want to add?
Well, let's watch some tits and blood.
Boom.
So here we go.
I've noticed a lot of our listeners seem to enjoy seeing the Jason watermark.
Right over the logo, yeah, it lines
and
up
how
nicely.
it lines
yeah.
up with certain elements of the film.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty funny.
So in this scene, this is in all the scenes with young Tommy where you don't see Corey Feldman's face. It's a little 55-year-old woman.
Wait, so right here is actually a little 55-year-old woman?
Yep.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, you know.
If you can't get Corey Feldman, then what you want is a little 55-year-old woman.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, movie making. You gotta love it. And this was filmed where?
This specific
This
scene?
sequence here.
I'm not sure.
I've heard it was filmed in either Corey Feldman's own backyard.
His shots were.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
That's why you never see him and like the grave or the guys or and Jason at the same time.
Because they only had him for that little portion of the filming.
This is probably on a set or I don't know, just wherever. But
I love the look of Jason's grave, or his dream grave.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's really, really cool. And here we have already. He had Corey Feldman by this point. Was now an established star.
Oh God, yeah, yep. And he talks about that he wanted to do this more than do Goonies.
Wow. All right.
You know, he claims.
Well, you got to admit, on paper, Goonies is a very odd film.
Sure.
And I would think if you were.
And he's with like 5 other kids where he would be the star child. Like, look, if you saw...
Right,
Did you see the face right there, the person running?
Yes.
He looked nothing like Corey. I don't even think they had glasses on.
Oh, my God.
So
I love when those types of gaffes. They're so heartwarming.
Now, I've heard that back if you had seen this movie in the theater, this scene when Jason pops up, out of the grave here, actually stands up, that they just... The audience has erupted. They cheered, standing ovations, and it shows that people.
But isn't it
just fell in love with this character pretty quickly?
Isn't it a funny, distinct irony that if that had been the way the film was actually going to go, where you just start the movie with Jason popping up out of the grave, I think people would have been completely fine with that.
Well, I think they do that on purpose. I think they kind of subliminally put that in your head so that later on, because it's kind of weird that Roy picks a dead killer to copycat. Like, why would anyone think it actually is Jason? Because why would you think he's resurrected? They know he's dead.
Do you see what I mean though? Like,
oh yeah,
you don't need much. You don't need much.
Exactly.
You don't need complicated mythology.
And that's what I mean. I think that's what Steinman was counting on is like.
But what I'm wondering is if that wasn't suddenly a detriment to the rest of the movie from the opening scene, because you've just false promised something to the audience, even though the audience has probably got to understand that there's usually either dream sequences or flashbacks at the beginnings of these films.
That's true. That's a little different. No scenes from the previous movies.
The idea that
this has got to be the first one.
You have actual Jason jumping up out of the grave, and then for the rest of the movie, you find out it's not Jason. That kind of feels like a kick in the balls at the end of the movie.
See, I argue that they needed this because it doesn't, like, why would Roy pick a dead killer? So to make the idea, people not question
feasible.
why, that it could be Jason, right? That's an actual threat, is the idea that he can be resurrected just by whatever means. You know what I mean?
I find
just by unburying him, like he's always just undead.
I find it incredibly heartwarming that somebody thought to bury Jason with his trusted machete.
That too. Well, it's a dream. It's a dream.
A second weapon.
It is a dream.
He has his mask on, and he's literally 6 inches under the dirt.
I think common knowledge, the way to tell the difference with the Jasons in terms of when it's Roy or the real Jason like this in a dream sequence, is the markings on the mask are red in the originals and they become blue when it's Roy. But you also can look at his clothes where he's wearing the same outfit from the previous films here.
Right.
And then when it's Roy, it's really it's like a Michael Myers jumpsuit.
There's something
one-piece jumpsuit.
I would argue, if I was going to nitpick,
yeah,
there is something in the gait here that does not feel like the previous Jason to me, though. Yet, if you were an audience in 1985, you wouldn't have had time to significantly scrutinize the other performances because you would only have been able to see the last movie.
Right.
And it was like a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess
this
it wouldn't
came
have
out
mattered.
a year later after part 4.
I mean, Tom Morga's body type is much different than Ted White or even Richard Brooker's.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know what it is? I came to think in my mind, I think it has something to do with the thick neck and those sloping prosthetic shoulders that they were giving Jason in the previous 2 sequels.
Yeah.
And Tom Morga's clearly not wearing.
Right.
So it's more of a leaner frame.
Mm-hmm.
But my other question to you, I wanted to ask your opinion on. Do you think audiences, like, say, opening weekend of this movie in 1985, do you think, like, midway through this movie, they were all hip to the fact that this is not actually Jason? Or do you think people were genuinely shocked when the unmasking at the end of the movie occurs? Is the movie trying to outpace its audience, or is it allowing the audience just to kind of, flow down the lake with its narrative? What do you think?
You're talking strictly the audience, like back then.
Back then,
yeah. I think that just because of the where they were in the history of horror in '85 and the types of movies that had come out, they probably fooled a lot of people into thinking that it was Jason.
Yeah, but see,
and then. Well, yeah, I think clearly they were disappointed. That's why the studio completely, reversed.
Even
course.
though I would argue that the Agatha Christie-esque reveal of Roy at the end makes sense in terms of what they've given you for breadcrumbs in the film. Okay,
right.
the kind of lazy breadcrumbs they provided. What I wonder about though is if you would have walked out of that movie theater completely, utterly disappointed simply because someone pulled the rug out from under you at the end of the movie, and it's not actually Jason. Even though it's amped up violence, amped up sexuality, much more bang for your buck than any of the previous sequels, and yet simply because it is legitimately not Jason doing the killings, do people leave the theater saying, F this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think they did. That's obviously why the studio... They reversed course. I mean, they were gonna. They signed, the actors, the director for a 2-picture deal that was gonna do the Tommy Jarvis thing. No, but there's also talk that John Shepard, I had heard, wasn't going to come back and do the sequel, that he ended up kind of feeling weird about doing horror. I think he was kind of a religious guy, at least at that point in his life.
Right.
And once he
probably had enough of a boost from this movie.
Well, they
that
tricked,
he felt
like you said, they tricked him.
They tricked him.
He didn't know he was signing on to a Friday the 13th movie.
But that's what sort of the ultimate point I think I'm trying to make at the beginning of this movie. The way that the producers had to simply trick the cast and crew to take part in this movie. It's almost like the movie is tricking its entire audience foundationally from the jump. So is that something you can ask of an audience?
The producers will say, though, they did that to the actors just to make sure no one leaked it.
Yeah, of course, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And even the guy who played Roy, Dick Wyand, had to sign a paper that he wouldn't reveal that the version of the script that everyone got had like the last couple pages blank, but he had like one that told him, I think so he's one of the few that knew,
right?
And
there's a lot of the
secrecy thing,
Exactly. Oh, I'm sure. You know, a lot of the architecture of the storytelling at the beginning of this film, I actually quite like. This whole halfway house, if you will, the murder of the kid by this ultra-violent other, person who's living there, a resident of this facility.
Yeah.
I think all of that is actually very exciting material to start this movie with. The forced connection between Roy as the paramedic, that he's somehow this kid's long lost dad.
Yeah.
And what I was wondering from your interpretation, is Roy seeing the guy laying on the ground and saying, "Oh my God!" Oh yeah, of course, because he's got the picture in his wallet.
Yeah,
so he knows that's his son.
If you look at his reaction,
so why does he not have a relationship with his damn son?
Once you know it's Roy and you watch the movie again, like all the little clues, his little subtle looks and the way he pops up all the time, like why would we be focusing so much on a paramedic that's showing up to these scenes?
Right,
you know what I mean?
That's a good point.
Even the other paramedic with them, he gets a shot or two, and that's a line, and that's that. But Roy, they linger. He's being suddenly talking to, and it just why do we need to talk to this guy as they keep finding bodies?
I think that maybe if there had been a more level-headed, artistically minded director at the helm of this film, I think a lot of these narrative eccentricities might have been cleared up, even during filming.
Yeah.
Where if the director was more in his own head in the right way, might have been able to say, look, there's some plot holes here that are making the reveal at the end feel even more distractingly disappointing. Mm-hmm. If we can fill in those potholes along the way, maybe we can make the storytelling more rewarding, much like the final chapter's storytelling. I think part of why the fourth film is looked at so reverentially is because it has a complete story in and of itself, with identifiable and dimensional characters. Mm-hmm. While there are more characters in this film, none of them have agency, and they're all sort of just sputtering around like NPCs.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so if you had a director that was more in control of building story, I think having Roy be revealed to be the antagonist would have felt less disappointing, because the story would have had it made more sense. Just the way Pamela Voorhees, when you realize that she's the killer at the end of the 1980 film, it's exciting because it makes narrative sense. Your brain does the back channeling work, and suddenly it all falls into place. You have to force the pieces to fall in place at the end of this film. And that's ultimately a stumbling block.
And once you think about it for more than a couple of minutes, it starts unraveling. Like I said, why would anyone be tricked into thinking Jason is walking around if Jason's dead? They should assume it's a copycat.
It's
and not
excellent
actually
question.
Him. Hey, but that, the guy.
But that's something a better director could have come up with something to make a Band-Aid.
Of course.
A creative piece of connective tissue.
Yes.
Right?
That's why I think, like I said, they give you that dream sequence. They sort of subliminally plant in the audience's head that Jason can just be alive again without much explanation.
Yep.
And that way they don't start questioning it when it looks like it could be Jason when it's Roy.
And maybe I wasn't clear earlier, but this is the point I'm trying to get at. They could have cut this entire film ultimately out of the canon and just jumped to the events of part 6.
Right.
Because ultimately all the audience wanted was Jason to come back out of the grave and continue killing people.
Now, one thing...
So it makes you wonder why they just didn't do that.
What I'm confused about here is, are they...
Simplify it.
Are they at Crystal Lake? Are they near Crystal Lake? Or...
I'm glad you asked that, because I was somewhat confused by this as well.
Yeah.
But my interpretation is, much as the Jarvis family builds the kind of the geography of Crystal Lake, that there are residents, I think this film takes the geography one step further and just is showing you a little bit more further out into the geography of the town.
It's got to be near there, otherwise people wouldn't be scared by the idea of Jason.
This is still adjacent to Crystal Lake, at least in my interpretation.
Territory, but we're just not at the lake.
Let's talk about Shavar Ross for a minute.
Yeah.
Reggie
the Reckless.
Not only do I think it's very creative that right from the jump they introduced this character similar to what Tommy Jarvis was like when he was a kid.
Yeah.
He even comes out with the scare gag out of the closet, which is something Tommy Jarvis himself would have done at that age.
Yeah.
So it makes a nice, instantly identifiable match between characters within the narrative, right?
The audiences clearly like the character from the other one, so let's do something similar in this one. You know what I mean?
I would argue that Shavar Ross, actually, am I saying that right? Is it
Yeah,
Shavar Ross? Is actually even more effective than Corey Feldman was as Tommy Jarvis, because he's even a far more empathetic character.
Yeah.
And a lot of that just comes right off of this actor's face.
Yeah.
Look at how vulnerable he feels on camera immediately. And immediately it occurs to you as an audience member, oh no. Like Tommy Jarvis before him, this vulnerable young child is existing within the reality that includes people like Jason Voorhees.
Yeah, you know he's going to get wrapped up
Right.
in the Voorhees thing at some
So
point.
you instantly are connected to him.
Yeah.
See, like I'm saying, all this narrative stuff at the beginning that's setting up the story within this film is actually quite cool. Like this psycho kid that kills the other kid and the paramedic sees it. I just wish there had been maybe a scene or two before it that would have given you some idea, and you could have done it amongst the three police officers, that addresses the fact that he has a son that he doesn't have a relationship with anymore. So then a couple scenes later, when he comes across this murder victim that happens to be that very son, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You could have just added that one little scene.
Now, you recognize who the counselor guy is,
He looks
right?
so familiar to me.
That's Richard Young,
Okay.
Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade. He's the guy who inspires Indiana Jones on the train.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Wait a minute! What?
Yeah, that's the guy who, like...
That's the inspiration.
He gets the cross
inspired
back,
Indiana
you
Jones.
know, yeah.
He gave Indiana Jones his hat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God! Can you just vamp for a minute? Because my brain is hurting.
Yeah, that's him.
You
And he's got that
literally-
cool scar on his face.
Oh my
and,
God!
you know,
You just literally hurt my brain by exploding it.
Yeah, there you go.
That's who he is.
Yeah, that's him.
And I always thought it was so odd in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. You would have thought they might have cast like an extremely recognizable older actor to do that one scene, the guy who inspires Indiana Jones in Indiana Jones's third movie, and yet it's someone you've really never seen before as an audience member, as an actor on a meta level.
no.
But that's who he is.
Yeah, I mean, look at him. He's got that
He's got
that
the
look.
posture
Yeah,
right there.
Yeah. Now, these two characters,
Joe,
though,
you blew my head off with that. That's a fun fact of all fun facts.
For me, all the main sheriff, the old lady and her son, those three characters bugged the hell out of me.
I mean, it's like lessons in overacting. It's overreaching character dynamics.
The whole thing, and a fun
But
fact.
Steinman was into this kind of body, overwrought sexuality and humor.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure to his you're under the guiding principles of the director's sense of humor.
Yeah.
You're either along with the ride or you either are, along with that style of humor or not.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
for me, and like you're saying, I just find it to be distracting.
Right.
And not only in a way like, oh, this doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have distracted me in 1985.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to tear down that actress or anyone that's doing their best work. They're only working with what they're offered in the script.
She's done a lot of movies. In fact, the wig that she's wearing in this, she did a movie with Burt Reynolds, and she wore that wig. And then, I think she wore it for her audition or something for this, and they were like, "We're just going to use that."
Wait, whoa. Burt Reynolds, the actor, gave her that wig?
No, she was in a movie with Burt Reynolds where she wore that wig.
Okay,
Then she
that's
wore
cool.
it to the audition with this, and they were like, "We're just gonna have you wear that that
I love
wig."
that. That's another great fun fact.
Now, this actor who was chopping the wood, he was also up for the Tommy role too at one point when people still were auditioning before they got to John Shepard. And
I'm also pretty positive he's in Return of the Living Dead this very same year.
Yep, he is.
He plays the punk with his head
Suicide,
shaved.
I
Yes,
think his
that's
name
exactly
is, right?
what it is.
I'm trying to find his name. I can't believe I'm
Well, Joe and I were when we're recording this, guys. We are looking at screens that have a lot of information on them, so we can keep track of stuff. We were both shocked at the level of actors that are in this movie.
It's Mark Venturini, and unfortunately, he's passed away, and also the actor here who plays Joey passed away.
Wait, both of them have subsequently passed away. Oh wow!
I believe Joey. This actor might have been pretty. One of them died at like 35 from leukemia, very young, tragic thing. But yeah, they're both passed away. And the redhead here is she was in Nightmare or Psycho 3.
Oh, that's right. I did see that along the way.
Then she's the phone booth kill.
Yep.
And I don't know why I feel like she
in
was
a lot of these movies, you were starting to get this punky, alternative female character, female teenage character that you're seeing here. Nightmare on Elm Street 3, you see this similar type of a character. I actually love that character archetype. And you know, guys, me and my crush lists and crushing and all that. I just have to say, like, that style of girl has been, like, foundational in my... You know, what I look for in females, like that style.
Supposedly, this whole chopping the wood death is a reference to the film called Don't Look in the Basement from 1973, where sort of same thing happens, where a man unexpectedly kills somebody as he's chopping wood.
Oh, wow. Well, that's interesting, too. And I think... there's another scene later in the film we're going to get to. I think it's the outhouse scene where that character, Victor Faber's name is kind of scrawled on the wall.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, like, you know, he's just taken to jail, and so he's sort of not out of the picture in terms of possibly being
I wanted to ask you about
a killer, you know?
So you don't think that... See, I think it's a storytelling mistake to directly address the fact that he went to jail because you can imply that obviously the events that occurred are going to send him to jail, right?
Yeah.
Without directly saying it. When you say it, it's almost like you close off that red herring possibility in the audience's mind. Yeah. When, of course, he's a perfect red herring.
Yeah, exactly.
So I probably would have left that little detail out.
It's gotta be an inside joke type of thing, right? Because what audience member knows what this kid's last name is? You know what I mean? Like,
that's true.
Really,
no, it's a really good point.
Or it's just such a subtle background thing. I don't think it was supposed to actually influence their thinking into he could have. You know, be out there, but
I love the montage of reaction shots then and there.
The zoom in quick,
it's really good.
Which, if you, I hate saying it, but if you see his porn movie High Rise, like there's a lot of that quick zoom into people. And
well, in this case here, within that editing, I thought it was very effective.
Yeah.
When I was watching this film to get ready, that's one of the little moments that really stuck out to me as effective.
Yeah, I mean, this shot, I guess, is set up to make you think that he could possibly.
I can see why.
Now be the killer for the movie, you know?
So just to make sure I was clear what you were saying earlier, that other actor, he auditioned for Tommy Jarvis.
Yeah.
I can see why he probably wasn't cast in favor of John Shepherd, because he's almost too strong of a character.
Well, yeah.
Or of a personality on
screen.
He
had the body type, they were saying, like, to be Jason, but too big to be Tommy. And even the kid who plays Tommy, John Shepherd, most of the scenes he's wearing cowboy boots to make him a little taller.
Right.
They said,
he's got a good stocky build to him. If you look at John Shepherd in this movie, right there you can see he's got those broad shoulders.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is Dick Wyand, the actor, has very broad shoulders, and yet Tom Morga is a much slimmer build. It doesn't distract me. I know I've brought it up twice, but this guy looks like a young John Voight to me. And I think he passed away. I'm pretty sure
I've seen him in some of the documentaries about the...
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
But I think like as of 2012,
if I killed him off accidentally...
He had his own show at some point, like before all this. I think it was even in like an ambulance show, to tell you the truth. But you see how much like they're lingering on Roy's reactions and he's getting all these close-ups. But not that you would think it yet.
Do you agree with me, though?
You would never put him with the killer, but it makes sense now that you watch it after.
Do you agree with me, though, that if they had just added, like, does your storytelling sensibility tell you, like, if they had just added one previous quick scene, like I said, amongst those three police officers, that addressed the fact that he has a son that he's lost his connection with and blah, 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 just to somehow build that story a little bit better.
Well, yeah, but then I think it would have been too
obvious.
because that's why they throw all that together at the end, which has got its own problems. But this scene is also really friggin' weird, right?
Okay, to talk me through why.
Well, these characters have no connection to anything.
Right.
They look like they're greasers from the 50s. Right? There's a lot of people that think they're a gay couple. The actor
coming
said
from
that,
like a gay club.
Well,
I
don't know.
God, that's really funny. That could be true.
And
they're sort of dressed not as greasers, but in some form of bondage gear or something.
And the actor said they never think of that when they were playing it, but they could definitely see how you could interpret it that way.
Okay, what stood out to me about them was they reminded me immediately of the goofy gang members from was it part 3?
Yeah.
Or maybe was that the final chapter of part 3? There was like the
no,
tough
it was part 3. Yeah.
And I made that comment about how these are the silliest, the most pathetic scary gang members I've ever seen on film.
They connect them by running into them in the store, and then Shelley banks into the motorcycles. They've got a grudge.
I'm not saying it that way. I'm just saying the franchise obviously has a funny visualization of these types of characters.
But why does Roy kill? These kids have nothing to do with the death of his son. This isn't. You're implying almost he's killing out of revenge, but
I give you a theory?
Yes.
Here's my quick, and this is just coming out of me right now on the spot. Imagine this. Roy has decided not only that he's going to commit to this vengeful murder spree, he's also going to commit to doing it under the guise of being Jason Voorhees. He needs to make sure that he is up to the physical and psychological task of being a psychotic killer. And so he practices on these guys to get the sense and get himself essentially, quote unquote, in character.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not suggesting that could be the actual realization or reasoning, but that's what it feels like to me. That's just how I interpret that. But truly knowing Danny Steinman, from researching this movie, there probably is no real reason for it. It's just extra kills.
Yeah. Oh, that's
it's
what
just upping the kill ante.
That's what most people attribute to. You could also say it's just like he's laying more evidence to the cops to say it's Jason. You know what I mean?
While the audience in 1985, or at least on opening weekend, didn't know Jason wasn't the killer in this movie.
Yeah.
Frank Mancuso Jr., Timothy Silver, Danny Steinman, they all knew it because they made the movie. Yeah. I think they were presaging this idea that they were going to need to provide the audience in terms of legacy with something additional to make up for the fact that ultimately they're going to find out it's not Jason. So they added like a third more killings from the last many sequels. You had like 12 or 13 kills in the last movies. In this one, you get 21.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you count the dream guys in the beginning. Yeah.
So what I'm suggesting is the producers of the film are offering that up almost like a peace offering in terms of legacy.
Did you know that this was Danny Steinman's last film he directed?
That doesn't necessarily shock me.
Well, listen, I highly suggest if you can get your hands on a copy of the Blu-ray for this movie that has the commentary with Danny Steinman and John Shepard and Shavar Ross, you have to listen to it. Danny Steinman does not take a single minute of it seriously. He's hilarious to listen to. He does nothing but bust the other two actors' chops the whole time.
He seems like a real, laid back kind of.
No, it's almost like
in
talking this Italian, the whole time. He's swearing up and down. He makes his whole shtick the whole time is to say he did everything. Every time one of them will be like, those costumes are great. He's like, yeah, I did that. That effect was great. He's like, yeah, I designed that too. It was funny. A joke,
Yeah.
But he doesn't take barely any of it seriously. You don't really get a lot of great information, but it is really funny to listen to, I have to say.
Shavar Ross, going back to him, I was saying before we were recording, he was actually probably one of the bigger stars that was actually on this set at that time.
He gets almost top billing.
He had a very healthy television career by this point. And at this exact moment, he was on the television series Different Strokes.
Yeah, that's what he was mainly known for.
And
as
you guys,
Gary Coleman's best friend.
Like anybody under the age of 30 listening
Dudley.
to this, you just have to really contextually remember that in 1985, there was like 3 networks and 7 television shows. So if you were on one of those shows, the whole frickin' country knew who you were.
Yeah.
You were like a very famous person.
Yeah.
So I once saw this interesting statistic. I think it was Rob Lowe that said it. It was like in 1984, the lowest rated show out of like 200 shows on the Nielsen ratings in 1984 is like 5 times bigger than the number 1 rated show in 2024.
Interesting.
Because there were so few things to choose from. So there were the audiences for these shows, even the lower rated shows, were like tens of millions of people.
Yeah, you picked from the 6 possible choices you had that night. Your TV would get.
I would think that if I was not born at that time to have experienced that, if I was like a young person
would
now,
sound fake.
I would have an impossible time understanding that.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Between the internet and cable and video. It's crazy to think. Isn't it nuts to think about that? Mm-hmm. That there was like 3, channels on VHF and a couple or 2 or 3 channels on UHF, and that's what you had. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing shut off at like midnight. At midnight, they played the Star Spangled Banner, and then the TV just went to static, and I guess you went to bed or read a book.
Well, no, there was always that one station that went late and played the weird stuff. I know around here we had channel 64 in Providence, and you'd get the Twilight Zone and Outer Limits, and that stuff would
and that would play during the night?
Not all night, but they would go a little past midnight. You like maybe to 1 or
what in God's name did people do?
Oh my God!
When you couldn't watch anything, I mean, that's so strange to me. Mm-hmm. It's like, think of how spoiled we are in terms of media now in 2025. It's sick. You can't even believe that it's gotten to this point that quickly. Anyway,
here's where Tommy utters a couple of his only 24 words in the whole movie.
Wow!
Can you think of it? So think about it as an actor. Like, he has nothing to remember besides his presence.
And
you know
yet
what I mean?
You can tell he's put in no less work, if not more work than
exactly,
others.
yes.
And he is I believe he was employing the Strasberg technique.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. He went and worked at a mental institute to prepare, thinking this was going to be...
he took this very seriously.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, it shows.
Yeah, and I think that's why his disappointment
stands out.
afterwards was, very palpable, because... he didn't know he was going to be in this type of a horror movie.
I like that moment because it gives the audience a demonstration that Tommy actually has a similar supreme power to Jason, a physical power.
Yep.
I wanted to mention something.
Which is, wait, because that's a great point, because I feel like when you see later in like the big climax and you see Roy as sort of Jason, and he's literally busting through walls like we're used to seeing Jason. Hey. But that doesn't... Like, look at Roy. Next time you see him, and try to imagine that guy just walking through a wall. It doesn't really make sense.
No, because he's not Jason.
I know, but,
I wanted to bring up this little thing.
Yeah.
Just talking again about John Shepard's Tommy Jarvis and this idea that he could be a killer or could be connected to Jason in this film. In the last film, in the final chapter, remember when we were talking about Tommy's mother and the actor, especially that played her, and she had this kind of haunted quality?
Yeah.
Imagine in the storytelling if you had somehow found a way to actually connect her to you find out at the end of the final chapter that she's somehow related to Pamela Voorhees, or there's a familial connection of some kind to the Voorhees family. And going into this film, now whether or not he ends up being the killer, Tommy Jarvis is genetically related or connected to Jason. I'm just addressing this as possible ways that you could have evolved the mythology to kind of push the story forward through these subsequent sequels.
Here we have yet
Joe
another...
did not like that.
Well, I'm trying not to miss stuff in the movie. But
sorry.
They introduced yet another red herring right there, of course. That guy comes out of nowhere. A crazy, dirty guy that looks strong as well. Mm-hmm. So, wait, maybe he's the killer. And supposedly this actress really just ad-libbed almost everything she said. They didn't really give her a lot to... a common... critique of Danny Steinman is that he's just didn't give the actors a lot to work off of, and if they Melanie Kinnaman and him famously didn't get along because he would kind of more or less tell her just do it, just just do it when she would try to get more direction out of him.
And you're right. Just as a note, here we are back with this Roy the paramedic
That's
again.
what I mean. There he is, like
who is
popping
apparently one of the main characters in this
and
movie.
he literally pops up going, "Hey, you talking to me? Huh? Huh? All right." That's what I mean. Like once
No,
you
you're
know,
right. It's funny.
it's and this guy, he's like one of those character actors that's been in a million billion things.
To me, this guy looks so much like. Do you know who Doug Jones is?
Yeah, of course.
The actor from Now.
Yeah.
Doesn't he sort of look
he
like
has
Doug
that feel.
Jones?
He has that feel.
Anyway,
sure.
just a tangent.
Another Roy shot. Got to see the paramedic.
Get him in there. Get him in the audience's
Closing the door. Yeah.
mind as much as possible.
Again, another scene that feels a little bit out of nowhere. Yes, this is the guy that drove the car that took Tommy to the halfway house. But,
Sorry, Buster.
and of course, they're giving this, Steinman helped write the screenplay. Was doing a lot of coke back then. This guy is doing coke. And he does say in his commentary, he's like, yeah, it was like just everyone, it was like doing candy. Everyone had it. It's what everyone was doing. And, but I just think that's what people who do coke say.
Isn't it funny the way the depiction of like the ladies' man has changed over the decades?
Yeah,
like
I know.
how
Look at this guy.
like a lot of these movies, or I can't think of the actor's name from Halloween 2, and he's like the
exactly,
the Goomba Italian ambulance driver,
Yes.
another paramedic in a slasher film, and yet none of these guys are ever like what's the character's name from Family Guy? The Lothario.
Quagmire.
Quagmire. He's built in that same mold.
Yeah.
Where the ladies, or on Three's Company, the neighbor Larry.
Yeah.
They used to be almost like these geeky type guys that were depicted as the ladies' man, and now it's the much more of the machismo, strong, handsome type.
And that actress, she came up with that line herself, that little scene to do something. They wanted her to just do something there. They didn't have a line for her. And she took it from Roy Scheider. He says that in, I'm blanking on the movie. He played the dancer. And
he played Bob, all that jazz.
All that jazz.
Bob Fosse.
Yeah, and and that was his line. He'd say, he'd look in the mirror and say, it's showtime. So that's where she got that from.
Man, Roy Scheider, what an underrated actor.
I do think, though, that this actor, if I remember correctly, was family to somebody in the production somehow or something like that, like a brother-in-law of a writer or something, so that, they put him in the role.
I've always noticed something weird about cocaine use in movies. I don't know about anybody out there listening, but I kind of get the sense that the worst possible drug to start ingesting socially if you think you're going to be hooking up with someone would probably be cocaine. It doesn't really have the effect that you think. It's not like a Viagra. It's kind of the opposite in many respects. People get what they used to call... I can't even say it because I don't know who's listening. But there's a term for it. There's even a term for it. Anyway.
Well, maybe, movies just want to portray how you want things to be.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I think a lot of the times in movies, and this was a distinct example of the opposite. I think you ever see a movie that depicts like an acid trip, and the person who's made this movie has never tripped on acid.
Exactly, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you always have that.
Danny Steinman did definitely.
That's the difference.
Do some coke.
That's what I mean. In this case, it is the dead frickin' opposite.
Yeah.
In 1985, him and Tobe Hooper, as directors, were having the frickin' time of their lives.
God.
I'm surprised there was any coke left for anyone else.
For people who try and do these sort of retro, authentic 80s feeling movies, you just got to get yourself coked up and go out and film.
Well, hey, look at Stephen King. Speaking of Stephen King again, he has claimed over the years, objectively, his greatest work was written either blind, drunk, or completely jacked up on coke, or a combination of the two. Mm-hmm. And obviously, stimulants augment creativity. Everybody knows this.
They're also employing the most classic jump scares. In the woods, it was a bunny, or in here, it's the old cat jumping down.
I'm glad you want to talk about that. I was going to let it slide this time.
It's really kind of
I'm always critical of it when we watch these movies together, but I absolutely deplore the cat fake jump scare thing. If you tried to pull that off in the 2020s, I think you should have your SAG director or your Directors Guild card pulled away.
Well, maybe he did. It was his last movie being directed.
Nobody should be using that trope ever anymore. That trope should have been retired back in 1985. It's nothing cheaper than the old cat jumping out of the cabinet. You know what I'm saying?
And again, it's sad. Like every single one of these kills was better and more graphic. And one thing I will say is like the makeup when you see it is mainly pretty good in this movie. I don't know if
it's really good.
I don't
I'm
know
glad
if
you brought that up.
level, but it's
it's really good. And it was actually done, like I was talking about in my intro, by a Friday franchise veteran, Martin Becker.
I also see David Miller was on the team.
Well, David Miller created the Jason hockey mask that you see in the opening credits.
Right.
And what's so fascinating, and if you guys Google the opening credits of Friday 5, you'll find these interesting behind-the-scenes photos where David Miller had crafted a huge, way oversized Jason mask in order to choreograph the opening credits, because he understood at this point, so did Frank Mancuso Jr., the opening credits of these movies had started to become sort of an art form of themselves, in and of themselves.
Yeah. And speaking of masks, I just want to give a quick shout out to the Horror Crypt, who the mask that you saw in our ad for this, that's where I got them off of Etsy, and they did a great job for what we were doing. So thank you to them. Now, this is the funny story that Dick Warlock tells, that as Tom Morga's down there in the Jason outfit looking up at the window, Dick Warlock is mooning him, trying to make him laugh under there.
Oh my god, like on set he's mooning?
Yeah,
oh my god.
Like Dick Warlock was
like
there.
Right off camera?
He was up in the window where Jason's looking,
that's so funny.
mooning him through the window, trying to make him laugh.
I love that. That sounds very Dick Warlock.
There's the old dopey cop falling asleep. Now, Danny Steinman will say that one mistake that was made was this actor right here. He did not like the way he's overacting every single word that comes out of his mouth, and you can see it. He definitely was not happy with that guy.
I just wanted to throw a quick shout out as well to someone who's always sending such knowledgeable and fascinating comments and messages through the Instagram page, and I always appreciate hearing from him. I just want to say hello to my friend Davey Deathray. Just wanted to send a little shout out to you. Since Joe did one, I figured I'd do one too. And how about James Shannon Morant? I just want to say hello to you. Always with positive comments, always being supportive of the work Joe and I do, and I just want you to know Joe and I, we both really appreciate you.
And I want to point out, as you hear them talking about Jason Voorhees, that this is the first film that he's ever referred to with his last name. Like someone says the name Jason Voorhees together.
Okay, yeah, because the name existed because Pamela's got a gravestone.
Yes.
And also, but that's the first time the name Jason Voorhees has been said on screen.
First time he's referred to by his full name, Jason Voorhees, yeah.
I always find it fascinating that we're 5 films in, and nobody has ever discussed or defined the idea of who Jason's father was.
Yeah.
And I know in the comic book lore, like the ancillary lore of the Friday the 13th films, it was established apparently, and I guess it's basically canon now, that his father was a guy named Elias Voorhees.
Well, we'll get to that. In the next movie, he wanted to film that. That director had
Tom McLaughlin of Part 6?
He had a whole thing storyboarded.
That was going to explore Jason's father?
His father's...
I can't wait to look into that.
Yeah, so we'll get into that in the next one.
There you go.
Yeah.
Because didn't it occur to you at any point in these 5 films, like nobody has mentioned the idea
he didn't get to do it, but he had it in the script. They storyboarded it, and there's a cool thing in... Geez, I don't know if it's in the Camp Crystal Lake, documentary and all that, but where they actually get the actor back who was the graveyard caretaker to voice his lines, and they show you the storyboards of the scene with the guy doing his lines, because it's a scene between the dad
guess what?
and the caretaker. We'll get into it more.
It does not surprise me one bit in terms of Part 6, Jason Lives, because Tom McLaughlin, that film's director, was an incredibly is an incredibly creative guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, of course, this is Debbie Sue Voorhees, and she was a Playboy bunny at one point before this. And I don't think it was why they hired her, but the producers were definitely excited
what
when they
are
found
the
out where her
chances of
last
that?
Well, so, and what happened was, too, was I believe...
Have you ever met a Voorhees in your entire life? It's not exactly a common name.
I don't have met it, but I know that they obviously exists, you know.
It's just, to me, I find that to be so
Because
serendipitous.
The writer, Victor Miller, had claimed he went to school with somebody with that last name. That's where he got it from.
Okay, gotcha.
You know?
You're right. Now, Joe had dispelled something. I had heard that director Danny Steinman had filmed basically like a full 3-minute softcore porn scene out of this that he wanted to insert right in the middle of this film. But you were saying to me what?
I think this actress said that they didn't really quite film a 3-minute long sex scene. It might have been a little longer. But also, famously, I think, was Frank Mancuso Jr. and the editor, I want to say Bruce Green.
Bruce Green.
They were there, and they were kind of looking at each other like, what? Oh, my God. Because Danny Steinman was, like, being very crude, yelling, like, you know, like, screw her hard. I'm trying to use all the swears he did, but you know, grab her this, grab her that.
That's where he'd come up from. Yeah,
and
that was his taste.
Bruce Green kind of looks at Frank Mancuso Jr. Is like, what do you want me to do with this? And he goes, I want you to cut it like a Pepsi commercial.
Wow, which is the dead opposite of probably what his original inception of the scene was.
Yeah.
I want to say,
holy boobs, Batman.
As far as my crushes go, and this is my second time bringing it up this episode, I'm going to put it out there. We're 5 films into the Friday the 13th franchise, and I am right here and now going to put Debbie Sue Voorhees at the very top of my Friday frickin' crush list. There's something so incredibly prototypically girl next door, and yet she has the body of a work. Her body is a work of art.
She would go on to eventually become a school teacher and
lose that job.
Twice. I think she got fired twice once students and faculty realized, she was in this, and maybe even Playboy. But
I'm wondering if that kill with the garden shears there, the way it's depicted, the way it's blocked and shot, if it wasn't some form of tribute to Tom Savini, a la The Burning.
Oh, yeah.
Because it just instantly made me think of The Burning when I saw that murder weapon, those shears. And the way they're exactly the iconic way that they're being used, like right from the poster of The Burning. I could be wrong.
Now, that role, too, of Tina, Gina Gershon also tried out for it. And Darcy DeMoss, who would appear in part 6.
Wait, Debbie Sue Voorhees' part could have been Gina Gershon?
She tried out. And then Darcy DeMoss tried out and kind of got the part, but then they said, are you okay with nudity? And she was like, well, I guess so, but you got to talk to my agent. And then they audition this girl, and then they go back to Darcy DeMoss and like, no, thank you, we're good.
The minute an actor walks in with the last name Voorhees, how do you not cast that person?
There's also
this is my favorite kill in the whole movie.
And it's got a classic continuity problem where for one of these, all of a sudden he's twisting it the wrong way.
I could see it.
So now it's going backwards.
Yep. But I would argue that once you reached the level of torque that would break a leather belt, you could probably just twist it and have this exact same effect. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't really stand out to me. I wonder if that actor that was Indiana Jones's hero, is that a real scar on his face?
Yeah, it looks like.
Do you think that might be an actual scar on the actor's face?
Yeah, I think it's there in Indiana Jones.
Is it?
I think so.
Because I was going to say, if it is, how unbelievably interesting that would be, considering Harrison Ford's facial scar.
Yeah.
Pretty neat. My mind is still completely shattered.
It just made that connection
by
for
that
you?
connection.
Yeah.
I would say, again, in 27 episodes, that was one of the most mind-blowing fun facts you've hit me with. And you guys, I might have mentioned this before along the line, but just to let you know, Joe and I try not to cover the exact same material in our research, because then we'd be talking about the exact same things the exact same way. So, I don't listen to any of the commentaries, even though I love the commentaries. Joe so sometimes he brings things up that I've never heard, or connections that are new to me, just like you're hearing them. So,
It is kind of funny, too, that they go off to see Demon, to take Reggie to see his brother, who the grandfather is kind of clearly saying he doesn't want him around, and he thinks he's not a great influence, yet they get one of the counselors to bring him to go. It's just, a way to bring in more characters to kill, but it's just is weird and doesn't make sense. And
This must have been an utterly confusing time for Jason Voorhees, if this was Jason Voorhees, wondering where all these people are suddenly coming from. And it goes back, that thought of mine goes back actually to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You know, because when Tobe Hooper was envisioning the idea of Leatherface for the original movie, that was kind of the character dynamic he gave Gunnar Hansen. Leatherface is completely confused as to where all these people are suddenly coming from.
Yeah.
Why are there teenagers running around everywhere?
Yeah.
And I like to think of Jason thinking that same way, even though it would be Roy here.
yeah. It's just weird. And, like, why is Roy there? He just so happens to be at this trailer park where these main characters, you know, or is he following them? Are they implying? I don't know. It's just kind of weird, you know? I don't know.
I would probably argue that he's probably, stalking them.
Yeah, I guess so.
But
I guess.
you say it, I've said it, everyone listening knows it. Like you said earlier, if you even if a light breeze blows, the entire house of cards of these movies sort of falls. But that's also part of the fun of it because, like we always say, the best way to watch these movies, to do these commentaries, you got to try to put yourself in the mind of the audience taking it in for the first time.
Right, like, so now the timeline for these movies, there had to be, this is kind of, like, what year is this supposed to be? There's a big time jump with Tommy's age. It's almost like, so Jason's been dead for
let's figure
10
it's
years
10
or
years.
something?
I would say it's probably 10 years,
right?
based on the look of John Shepherd.
So this should be like saying it's 1995.
Okay, we could reduce that because a lot of, as you well know, a lot of actors, like the way teenagers were cast in the 80s were with like 30-year-olds. So let's say 7 or 8 years has gone by.
Yeah.
I guess it's manageable, but again, if you think too hard about it.
Right, you just gotta, I don't know. So...
Demon is another character that just reinforces that point I was making a little bit ago about the two greasers. The Friday the 13th franchise has such an odd visualization of gang members.
Yeah. And he was also in Return of the Living Dead. He was the other actor that appeared in Return of the Living Dead.
Holy Christ, you're right. He's also in Return of the Living Dead.
Yep, fun fact.
Wow, both of those actors are in that movie. That's crazy. Why did I not see that?
And it's like the same year, too. You know what I mean?
1985.
Right?
Yeah, we covered it in our horror landscape part.
Yep.
I'll tell you what, though. Miguel Nunez Jr. playing Demon.
Yeah.
Whatever quibbles you might have about the characterization all falls away because he's so charismatic.
Yeah, and it's like, why is the grandfather not want him around? The guy's like sweet. He's like, you know, hanging out with his brother.
He's sweet, but
got
clearly he's wrapped up with a bad crowd. He's running literally with a gang. So
is he? What gang?
Well, he's wearing like a gang vest.
Is that gang?
To me, I would take him as a like the characters from Part.
Living in a trailer park.
You know what? He's probably part of the same biker gang as the characters from Part 3.
It's his son. It's 10 years later.
I know, but I'm just joking.
I know.
All right, maybe he's not in a gang, but he's definitely portrayed in his costuming as some sort of like a troublemaker, someone who would carry a switchblade.
This guy is just ridiculous.
And they gave him that horrible, like, cliched fake grunge on the teeth. Yeah. It's like, you know, you just know exactly that's just makeup. It stands out.
Of course.
It feels awkward. Yeah. And I'm not taking away any of the work Martin Becker and his team did. I just think these characters, they don't hold up.
Yeah.
They didn't age well.
Nope.
Now, if you're watching Friday 5, you know, and you're having a couple beers and you just want to laugh, well, then these characters suddenly are super entertaining in that regard. Mm-hmm. But if you try to watch this movie in the reality of what it's presenting, they don't feel like they're the part of the same tone as Tommy Jarvis, played by John Shepherd.
No,
more with this incredible strength.
I was going to say, they're just setting up you to possibly think, you know, Tommy is capable of killing.
And violence.
Yeah.
He is exhibiting violence.
Yeah. But it's not Jason's MO to punch either.
And it's clearly not John Shepherd in the wider shots.
Now, I guess, you know, we should talk a little bit about Melanie Kinnaman. You know, she and Danny famously didn't get along. She had a little bit of an attitude of I think she thought as a lead actress in the movie she should be I don't know, cater to a little bit more than she was, and it's weird, it's just, sometimes it's a detail that can change a story. The producers will say, oh, I thought, she thought she'd get picked up every day in a limo, and when we told her, that's not the type of production we are.
Really?
But then she tells a story of like, well, my car was in the shop and I asked for them to provide a ride,
that makes
and they
sense.
said no. So I don't know whose side to really believe.
It's like this is a major Hollywood production, and they can't give this poor person a ride in a limo.
I don't know.
It's how often are you going to be on a
exactly.
movie set at working? You might as well get the limo.
But then when, Danny Steinman did the commentary I heard, which was like 2009, way after the fact, but he did nothing but compliment her. Almost too much. You wonder if he was trying to make up for the fact that she'd been going around for years saying that, he hated me, and we didn't work well together. But, there it is, over his shoulder. Fadden was here.
Oh, there it is.
So that's the last name of the guy with the axe chopping the wood in the very beginning that does the first kill. So I can't imagine the audience was ever
Would make
expected to
that
put
connection?
that together. Yeah,
No, I don't think so
Unless originally you were gonna.
Did they say the character's name?
That's where I gotta listen. But it would have been so subtle.
You wouldn't have made that connection.
If you're actually trying to use it as a way to divert the crowd's attention to think he might have done it, then it's not obvious.
I've watched this movie over the decades like more than a dozen times. I've never noticed it until this month.
Yeah, I know. I love it says all over it.
Yeah, I was trying to read.
Walls.
I was trying to read some of the other ephemeral tagging, but try to see if anything kind of made a connection. But yeah.
But even listen to him and his girlfriend, they're just singing to each other. Like this guy
While
doesn't
he's
seem
taking
very
a dump.
funny. Yeah, and he dies in his own stink. Let's just say it. That's awful. And everyone also likes to point out that he stands up and his pants are kind of already up. All he does is pull up his zipper. So it's like, what?
That's a little odd.
It was a really, I don't know, bad attempt at faking pulling up your pants or something.
Also, just from like a pragmatic point of view, it's funny when you stop to consider that the last 5 minutes of this mainstream Hollywood movie is taking place while a character's sitting on a toilet taking the dump. In like 20 or 25, 30 years before that, you weren't even allowed to show a toilet on screen on a TV show or a movie.
It also kind of shows you,
I think, until Psycho.
Danny Steinman's sort of sensibilities.
Of course,
you know what I mean?
100%.
He's like a 13-year-old.
Look at her pulse. It's just
I know.
pounding.
Yeah.
Her pulse is just pounding. Now,
Which
I would argue it looks cool.
It might have still been pumping a little bit.
And I just want to say, I was playing devil's advocate because a lot of people point out that her pulse is really like jacking. But I think it makes the effect even more gnarly in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of moving and dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what? You had said it earlier. While Martin Becker's work is very serviceable, it doesn't have the artistry and the character of some of the work of the past films.
They're solid, and I do think if you got to see all the kills in their full state,
that's the thing, right?
That you probably give this guy a little more respect, but it's hard to judge when pretty much most of his work is cut.
I wanted to ask you though, do you know if they ever released any form of a restored cut?
Oh yeah, you can watch. I think on the Scream Factory box set. I think there's a deleted scene section, and you can see the kills. But did they ever
restore the kills?
No, I don't think within the film.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a fan edit. Yeah,
it could be.
But out there, but no.
God, she is absolutely adorable.
And she talks about, so there's another great
both of them are.
There's a great commentary that has...
He is too.
Commentary by the quote-unquote punk girl, whose character is named Violet. It's got the main actress, Melanie Kinnaman, and it's got Debbie Sue Voorhees. And those three actresses do a commentary that's interesting to listen to. Because what's really interesting is like Melanie Kinnaman really had a different experience. Like, as much as she will trash Danny and what happened, the other two talk about him like he was great. And they kind of during the commentary times will say like, someone will say like, oh, I'm surprised to hear that. That's not my experience, I
like that shot with the rack focus there. It's actually a really, really well
one of the better shots in the movie. Yeah, definitely. Now this actor talks about you know, in a second, we're going to get his POV shot where they actually strap this big camera right here, and he's just riding the motorcycle with the camera strapped to the motorcycle.
Which you think would off-balance the motorcycle completely.
And that's what, you know, Steinman said to him, like, don't screw this up. That's a $50,000 camera, you know?
On a $50 bike.
Like, no pressure, but don't fall. And I guess, you know, he pulled it off, but...
I wanted to ask you something. It's literally been crying out to me the entire time we've been watching this movie. I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on why, when they were marketing this movie, they chose to market it in some regards using this extremely odd-looking hockey mask.
Right.
Now, do you know anything about... Because when you Google Friday the 13th A New Beginning, I want to tell you, because I've done it 100 times this month, though that mask is like the main thing you see come up.
Everywhere, yeah.
So what is the story with that?
Posters. I don't...
It's ridiculous looking.
I don't have concrete information about, like, why they chose that. My feeling is that they didn't know what to do with... If they had put the classic Jason mask on, it would almost imply too much to the audience that it's a Jason movie. If they put the blue, you know, chevrons mask up, then you're kind of, it's, you know, giving people too long to study differences and maybe figure out what's going on. And I think they know what to do, and for some reason, they go with this third choice of something that just...
completely neutral.
Yeah. But now, and here's the cool connection. When you start digging into that particular style, which has the square holes cut on it and these sort of ridged lines above the eyes and down the middle, that's the same mask from Road Warrior. The big guy,
Lord
Humongous.
Oh,
yes.
my God, you're right.
It's dirty in Road Warrior.
God,
but
you're absolutely right.
Or Mad Max 2. It's part 2, right?
The Road Warrior,
yeah. The Road Warrior. So, yeah.
Wow, you're absolutely right.
And there's like one other tie to it in some Hollywood thing they used it. And I think, it was used to spoof the idea of, the idea of like Jason, a killer in a hockey mask. But, no, I couldn't find a lot of information as to exactly why. Just there seemed to be some sort of connection between the Mad Max movie and this. Like using it, right?
Yeah, because the Lord Humongous character from The Road Warrior has always stood out to me simply because I was amazed that whether it was a coincidence, an accident, or whatnot, putting a antagonist character in a movie around this time in a hockey mask just seemed completely counterintuitive. And yet, in George Miller's defense, in his context, it works just as well there, too.
But that was way before this. That was 82.
So that was 82, so there you go.
So, I don't even know if we got the hockey mask yet. It wasn't until 83 with part 3,
you're absolutely right.
So he did it first, really.
Yep. See, I sometimes get my dates confused, which movie came out first, what was it? So that makes more sense then.
Yeah.
But it stands out to me like a sore thumb.
If anybody knows more about that, Keith Voss, please let us know what's up with the weird square-holed mask. I think for a little while fans thought it was a rifle, some sort of air rifle mask, but then they tracked it down to this one particular type of goalie mask.
It really is the Lord Humongous mask.
That was used for Lord Humongous. Yep.
Wow. Okay, there you go.
And that's
because
all. That's all I got on that.
It's connected to the marketing of this movie, that mask, that bizarre mask.
In a weird way, I really like this actor here.
I do too. I really do too.
He's endearing. He's a good actor. I feel like the stutter, which you would almost worry in a film like this, would come off as insulting if they do it comedically or wrong. But it's you kind of just buy that this kid's got it
And I would argue that's the reason why Danny Steinman allows this scene, and especially this one shot, to go on so long on these two characters in the midst, building towards the crescendo of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's because he noticed that, I'm sure, I've got a scene with really good acting that feels very realistic, and it will lend some sort of like weight to the rest of the film. But you're right, this actor, both of them are actually extremely natural and very, very talented. She is adorable. Adorable.
Yeah. And I don't know why I feel like she was in a few horror movies.
Oh, I
Psycho
totally
3
believe that.
and I don't know why I keep on tip of my tongue. I want to say Nightmare 3, but she wasn't in Nightmare 3.
No,
right? There was no.
No, definitely
It doesn't
not.
make any sense, right? I don't know why that keeps popping in my head, but
Well,
anyway,
maybe because I put Nightmare 3 in your head because
maybe.
of
The same type of
similar
characterization, yeah.
characterization. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it it kind of has that going against it too, where it's a Friday the 13th movie that's really pulled out of the woods a lot. I mean, we get there, the big crescendo, the rain and chase in the woods, but in general, we're not with a bunch of kids at the lake.
Well, I'm sure it was completely accidental, but you go ahead.
No. It's all right. Keep going.
But you can explain it that, well, after you see the movie, it sort of makes sense, canonical sense, because Roy isn't Jason. He isn't connected to those woods in this strange sort of avenging way. And so they're not as holy to him.
Have you heard about her original death scene?
No, I have not.
It's horrific.
I feel like I'm about to.
Yes. So
go
obviously
ahead.
here in the movie, we'll see her. She gets just sort of stabbed in the stomach.
Oh my God, I do know what you're talking
And
about.
originally
I
she
do
was
know.
supposed to be doing gymnastics, and Jason was going to be pulling the cleaver right down in between her legs.
Yes.
And there's a photo you can see of her
Yes.
in the makeup, with the blood all over her. But obviously, the MPA was not going to.
What really blows my mind about that kill, now that you bring it up, is here you have a franchise that has been dead center in the crosshairs of not only the Motion Picture Association of America for its violence against women, but the critics like Siskel and Ebert, who attacked this movie like they attacked the final chapter. And yet you were going to put front and center a kill in which a young female takes a wound to her crotch, of all places.
Yes.
It would have been a middle finger to the critics and the MPAA, but it would have been too over the top. And remember, when you start to bring Jason into some sexualization motifs, I think it erodes his kind of vitality.
Yeah.
It's not connected to him. Like, that's not a motivating thing to him.
I mean, in that case, it's almost like that's the position she was in when he entered the room. She's doing gymnastics and she was like upside down and he just attacks. Now, of course, so who knows? But
you can't help but ascribe sexualization to that kill.
Of course. Which is why it gets cut.
Like Freddy, for example, almost all of his kills are psychosexual.
Yeah.
But Jason, he's much more primitive and primal.
Yeah. Yep. And of course, this girl would be on a bunk bed. It's just a setup that somebody's under there.
I just want to say, as a quick tangent, because we haven't had many this episode, it's so funny to you just bring up the bunk bed in the scene, because only like a month ago I started having this huge epiphany that I was like, what is it, illegal for adults to have a bunk bed? Yeah. Like, I would like to have a bunk bed in my room.
Although I guess this is a halfway house, so it's like multiple kids would be sharing a room.
But I almost made the decision to get a bunk bed. The problem is my ceilings are too low.
It seems a little weird though. You're sharing rooms, you're in a halfway house, and you're just going to bed practically naked. But,
right. Yeah,
whatever.
Well, little does this character know there's millions of leering horror geeks watching her at home and in the movie theater.
And the second, when he goes back to the...
Loves being underneath something, stabbing upwards. He absolutely loves that. That's like a tribute to his mom. Even though it's not Jason.
So this scene, this dance has kind of become infamous. She talks about it being this sort of improvised...
Like Crispin Glover's.
Well, there was a sort of the mentality to it where you're acting out the lyrics of the song within your dance. I don't know if there was a name for it back then, but she also brought the song to the producer's attention. She suggested it. They used it, and everyone kind of knows it from this movie now.
You know what?
And it's all because of her.
I think I know what sprung Nightmare 3 in your mind. Not only is she dressed like the character that dresses like her in Nightmare 3, doesn't she look like the other victim that Freddy goes, "Welcome to prime time, bitch," and pushes her into
Tina.
the TV? Yeah. Doesn't she sort of have the same face and sort of blonde hair?
Yeah.
Maybe that's what triggered it.
They said, when they were casting, that they were actually looking for a Pat Benatar was the description. That was the closest sort of punky, female, hot
Yeah, I can see that.
Star at the time.
They definitely cast
I think she went a
correctly.
little more new wave punk, than Pat Bennett's or yeah.
Oh,
and
I think
it was like the Love Is a Battlefield
there
era,
was something about this actor basing some of her look, I think, on Susie from Susie and the Banshees.
Yeah, I could. This actress definitely was personally in tune with that music scene. You know?
And I'm almost positive somewhere along the line I read that she was directly paying homage to Susie from Susie and the Banshees.
Right.
And I don't really know any of that band's music. Do you?
A little bit.
Yeah?
Very little bit.
Guys, I just want you to know...
They did a movie. I don't want to say she's in a... They did music for a Batman movie or something, or... I don't know.
While I try to collect data and information about movies and comic books and TV, I just, even though I was in bands for years and decades, I just don't know much about popular music, So
Well, I would argue you know a lot about certain types that we very much focused on, like in our music career,
but I can't identify who sings something very well, or what year a band was around, or what kind of music this is called, or I'm not good at that.
So a few minutes ago you brought up the Siskel and Ebert thing, and
yes.
you gotta go watch. I mean I don't know, you don't have to, because they completely hate it. They don't get it. It's almost angering to watch these guys that were considered so supposedly in tune with movies and everything, just absolutely miss the point of why people enjoy horror movies. They just don't get it. And at one point, Siskel even says during the review, he says, "I'm debating whether or not I want to ruin the ending right now for everybody." He actually says
he did
it.
not.
He didn't do it.
Oh, okay. But still, even threatening
So, I mean, he's a jerk. He's the one who was going to...
That's way above and beyond your job as a critic or an analyst of media.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
To try to be detrimental to a work of art's potential because you don't like it is stepping above and beyond your responsibilities as a critic.
He was the one that tried to put out Betsy Palmer's address. Luckily he gave the wrong address. But to tell fans to tell her how bad she was in it.
Their review of the final chapter, even by 1985, was so well known. And it was like a rallying cry against these kinds of horror films. And so here they are a year later, and they're just trying to literally discredit any artistry at all from existing within this subgenre.
They really don't get it. They expect too much of a horror movie. They can't accept an idea that not every movie needs to be an all-encompassing, well-rounded, thing. That you just have fun with movies sometimes.
You should really be either placing analysis or critique on a work of art based on what that work of art is attempting to communicate. Mm-hmm. When you start applying your own sensitivities and proclivities and thoughts and hang-ups onto art in the process of placing analysis upon it or criticizing it, that's when I think it becomes a very slippery slope.
This scene also famously, if you watch her, see her pink sweater keeps disappearing from shot to shot.
Oh.
Huge continuity problem.
Yeah. Wouldn't have really... I didn't even notice.
Well, see, so it's interesting. A lot of fans do, right? And there was even... And it really bugs Melanie Kinnaman. The editor, when she brought it up to the editor...
One of the greatest screams in horror history, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think pretty objectively voted.
Yeah, yeah.
He can crank it. He's got lungs on him, Shavar Ross. He can, and boy, can
gone.
that kid run.
He's out of there.
That kid took off. He was like, there was like steam behind him.
But the editor, Bruce Green, kind of insulted her by saying, like, look, if people are focusing so much on your sweater disappearing,
then the movie's not working.
They're not focusing on you. You're not doing your job as an actor.
That's the absolute truth.
But she is so mad about it to this day.
Oh, look, there you go.
It's gone.
Look.
Yep.
You're absolutely right.
So
hey, look, filming a movie, period, is difficult. Filming a movie in the rain is twice as difficult. Filming a movie in the rain at night is 3 times as difficult. Filming a movie in the rain at night in the woods is another level. So things happen. You're just trying to get the shots.
She famously also hated the wardrobe in this movie, but she said she loved it when it came time for the rain scenes because she actually looked good wet, which, I'll agree with that shirt.
I would also agree with that.
That shirt is amazing.
Now, what do you think, generally speaking, of the Part 5 hockey mask? Do you like the
with
blue?
the blue.
What did you call those blue things? You had a word
chevrons.
for it. Well, is that a word? Is
Yeah,
that a real
it's a shape.
Oh, I did not know that.
Think about the Chevron gas station.
Oh,
it's,
wow.
It's the one on the top. It's like the V, the red V.
Okay, I did
But-
not realize that.
So the blue ones are like the red V just pulled apart, you know?
I actually think the Part 5 mask is pretty badass looking.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the chance to do something else, you know, and it doesn't have to follow with all the cuts and blood and this of the others, you know, it's interesting. And of course, it's just that biggest clue that you're not seeing real Jason.
And I know it's just a real stretch, but the idea that on one mask is red, the other mask is blue,
Yeah.
it also, to me, hallmarks 3D, which is part of Friday the 13th history.
Yeah.
Just something that I just came up with, just right then and there.
You know what I mean about his clothes, too? Like, he's doing a very Michael Myers overalls thing, like the one-piece jumpsuit.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
Well, Jason's, even Roy's interpretation of Jason is consistently over these sequels and films taking pages out of Michael Myers' playbook.
Supposedly that was a real fall, and then they had her just kind of keep going with it.
It looked like a real fall, actually. I actually, the more I think about it, I think Tom Morga does feel a little bit more like Richard Brooker. Maybe it's just Ted White. It feels a little different in his kind of portrayal to this. But I do see a lot of Richard Brooker in it.
This stunt coming up with the bulldozer or the tractor, when he takes that hit, Tom Morga says that was his favorite stunt. Like, he really took that hit. When he's flying down on the ground, that's from the actual force of being hit by a tractor, you know? But obviously they had it all worked out so he wouldn't get hurt, but that's him really getting hit. And it was his favorite stunt, he said, right there.
And you find a very that's a gnarly stunt. You find a very important detail that if you want to battle Jason, you should mimic him and explode through a door.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Think about Roy doing like walking through doors and stuff. Like, that guy couldn't do that, but you know, whatever.
Unless Camp Crystal Lake and the town surrounding it, the doors have just been built out of some local wood that is like balsa. No, I'll tell you, like, I've noticed as we're recording this movie actually moves pretty swiftly. You know how sometimes we feel like some of the movies, you feel a drag or you feel the heft of the narrative?
Well, there's a lot of boobs in it.
Yeah,
so.
there was a lot of that. There was a lot of that. I would, if I had to guess, there was probably 11 or 12 boobs in this film.
At least 11.
Lady, kicking him in the face, it's the one place he has protection. He's got a mask on. A hockey mask, no less.
Yeah,
you could shoot a puck at it and it would be fine.
Roy can also...
And also, where did Roy get the elaborate special prosthetic effects
I know.
that allowed him to look like
there's
Jason?
a lot of questions you can get into about Roy, and like when they thumb through his wallet, it's so weird he has a picture of himself in there.
He does? I didn't notice that.
First you see it, so you can they're doing it
That's so Roy.
You can obviously put it together. It's like Roy, and then the picture of the kid.
Oh my god!
And then there's the newspaper clippings that weirdly has a mugshot of Jason. Like, where did someone get a photo of Jason?
Wait, Jason with his mask on?
Yeah, like
in a mugshot?
It's supposed to be an old article about the real Jason. I don't think it's a mugshot, but it's like him just looking at the camera.
The same person who captured that photograph for that article is probably the person who buried him with a machete in his grave.
Right, yeah.
Just a fan.
Yeah.
Just a fan. And
they always have to bury him with his mask.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, really, though, who applied these incredible prosthetic effects to Roy Burns? How did he get that done?
Well, I think it's just
or is it just
hood.
a mask,
yeah,
like a hood mask type?
His face is open in there, but it's just, the surround. But yes.
Can't you just let me have my quibble?
I know. And this is sort of an homage to, when she's got the chainsaw in part 2. Ginny.
Yes.
But this is pretty badass, though. I feel like this comes off a little more badass.
Go, Shavar Ross, go! Cheer her on. Yeah, this is,
What you talking about, Christian?
And I like that he's just one-arming it.
Uh-huh.
It's not like using it like a lightsaber.
They sliced his other hand already.
Right.
Like, Roy is... Like, he's committed to this. He's getting... I would, at this point, be like, all right, I'm out. I'm going to the hospital. Sorry.
Pull the mask off.
Sorry. Hey, whoa. Game over.
I'm Roy. I went crazy.
Over.
My son was murdered. I'm crazy. Just lock me up. I do not want you to shove this chainsaw through me.
You are right. There's a weird lack of connection to the son. Besides, it's just his son.
It could have been done with one scene towards the beginning of the movie.
Why is he in the halfway house? Yet it's also in the same town where his dad actually lives. Like, why can't he be his dad?
Like, if his father is the paramedic that gets called to go to that event and pick up the bodies.
For him to get this bent out of shape about his son dying, you'd think that they would have been close. And he's got a recent picture of his son in the wallet too. There's a lot of like, huh? What?
Yeah, no, I know.
When you really think about it.
Again, for the 33rd time, you could have probably fixed all this with one expositional scene towards the beginning of the film that explains a little bit of their connection. You could have done it in 2 or 3 lines.
I don't think Dick Wyand ever did any of these shots as Jason, besides when we see him with the mask
No, I think
off.
it was a guy named Johnny Hawk.
Well, Tom Morgan did most of it. Johnny Hawk did that beginning dream sequence, and the only other one he did was coming up when he falls from the balcony.
I thought a lot of this might have also been Johnny Hawk.
This is mainly Morgan, except for that fall off the balcony for whatever reason. I don't know why, but...
See, I would imagine right now Tommy Jarvis is in this sort of liminal space where he's thinking, am I in a vision?
Well, every other
am I hallucinating
every other
this?
time it has been. So
exactly.
I think he's expecting Jason to disappear, but he's about to get stabbed.
Yeah.
Also,
now he knows he's awake.
How did Roy miss him? How did he just
because I
graze
think
him?
He's not trying to kill him yet. He's toying with him. He's slowly getting ready to dramatically kill him.
Oh,
that would be a very. I actually too close
to home.
That puckered my brown eye a little bit there. That really puckered my butt.
It's just
It's a particular. It's not the groin. It's not the thigh. It's like right in between.
Roy's shoulder is
soft
messed.
flesh.
His hand is messed up. His gut is messed up.
No, listen.
His groin is messed up.
Listen.
How is he getting up again?
If you got stabbed right there in your leg, you know how quickly you'd be bleeding out from that?
Well,
because it's all arteries down there.
Yeah.
You'd be bleeding out.
From all 4 of those major hits. It's
all
ridiculous.
of the other wounds he's taken, I can actually believe how he could, under adrenaline or demented, how he could get past
And he's
it.
a paramedic. He should know what's going on. He should know that he
shot to your
needs
inner thigh,
medical attention.
If you're going after someone for real, the armpit or the inner thigh, that's the quickest place.
And so fun fact: supposedly Mancuso Jr. is the one who came up with the title, A New Beginning.
A New Beginning. Oh, really? Now that's a very cool fun fact. I did not know that. I was kind of curious about that. I love the fact that only in the Friday the 13th franchise do you have, in 1984, a film called The Final Chapter. And then in 1985, you have a film called A New Beginning.
Yeah, well... I mean, yeah.
It just, what it is a testament to is the intense popularity of these films at that time.
Yeah.
That you could get away with just about anything, like we've been talking about most of this time.
Well, I mean, like we talked about before, Mancuso was always mad that he didn't get the respect of other sort of filmmakers and producers, no matter how much money these movies made. He was trying to move on, but clearly there was still a market for these movies. So, he stepped back a little, but remained, in there a little bit. But I feel like it shows.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, like I said last episode, I think a lot of why the final chapter feels so cohesively solid was because there was a director and a producer at the controls the whole time, guiding it to its completion correctly.
It's kind of more messed up that Roy would be trying to kill a kid than Jason would be. You know what I mean?
Yes.
A second ago when he's going after Reggie? Like, really?
The only way you can really think of it is at this point when he's wearing the mask, he's under the same potential curse that happens to have its grip on Crystal Lake. And when you're under that mask, you're just so demented. He is Jason. He's like possessed of Jason's...
Of course, you got to look over the edge.
And I'm not saying like he's possessed of Jason's spirit like you see in Jason Goes to Hell.
Right. I know what you mean.
But
like,
psychologically.
Yeah.
He's killing everybody in his way now.
Yep.
Oh, God.
And, the ending, too, is a little Scooby-Doo-ish.
I would say it's a lot Scooby-Doo.
Yeah,
I would say it is 100% Scooby-Doo-ish. I would say you could probably drop the ish off of it and just call it Scooby-Doo.
Again, it goes back to what was probably Danny Steinman's sensibilities. He, it's a more juvenile approach to this whole sort of thing in a way.
I love that Tommy
that
Jarvis grabs that machete again.
Yeah.
Because you have to remember, after the events of the last film, that machete is just as connected to Tommy Jarvis's history now as it is Jason's.
Yeah.
So I actually do like that. And I hope, guys, look, if it feels like Joe and I have just been picking on this movie, I hope that's not how it's come across. Because overall, like all these movies we cover on Haddonfield Radio, I really enjoy this movie.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like I'm critiquing it within the realm of just these batch of movies, and
we just try to keep it fair and keep it above the line. That as best as we can.
The movie's entertaining. I'm not going to say it's a really great, fun, entertaining movie.
No, it's not a barn burner,
but it's entertaining.
It's not really a banger.
I can deal with it.
Like Final
it doesn't
Chapter
offend me.
I would say is a banger. Part 3 is a banger. Part 2 is a banger. Part 6 is a banger.
Yeah.
This one is like a sturdy bridge that gets you to the events of the next film. But I will say this. I think if Part 6, in terms of fan appeal, had continued to tank, there would probably not have been a Part 7.
No.
I think even though the box office continues to sort of erode as we go forward from here, what continued the series along was the goodwill of the films themselves and the fan appeal. Because Part 6 is considered an excellent
He's got
film.
a picture of himself.
Like, why does he have that picture of himself?
And he has like this close-up mod or recent picture of the kid.
See, they could have...
He's gonna pull out the articles with this weird picture of Jason that somebody got, which
it's kooky. It's a little kooky. You got to admit.
Now, supposedly, like after this, once she gets to like visiting Tommy, it was the actor John Shepherd that came up with the ending and presented it to Danny. And originally, it had a lot of dialogue for Tommy, and he's like, "Are you kidding me?" He's like, "You don't say 2 words in the movie. You can't go on this like monologue here. Look at the picture."
I want to see.
And
oh yeah, and it's like he's peeking around a corner.
Exactly. So then
photo bombing.
The next day he comes in and he says, "Yeah, we're going to use that, but we're just cutting your dialogue out of it." But the idea that he came up with for sort of Tommy becoming the killer here in the end it came from John Shepherd. And so again,
yet it is so strange when you think about the portrayal of Tommy Jarvis through the prism of Tom Matthews in Part 6 is so distinctly different than the John Shepherd version of the character.
Yeah.
It's actually much more in line with like an adult version of the Corey Feldman version of the character, like sort of a little bit geeky, something a little bit off kilter, and like Tom Matthews, another actor from Return of the Living Dead, now that I think about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
Yep.
It's weird because they didn't have to continue with him if they were just going to sort of go with a resurrecting. They could have just resurrected Jason and have him go after some more kids at the lake and all that,
It's a very, honestly, in terms of its cohesiveness, I would say it's a very lazy, unofficial trilogy of stories.
Of course. It's not the trilogy that was intended, or what they could have done, but
what's so interesting that happens in terms of erupts out of the fandom later, decades later, is Vin DeSantis' sort of reclamation of the Tommy Jarvis character in his fan films, his Never Hike Alone fan films, where he brings that character to sort of new prominence again.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Tommy Jarvis character really is sort of the Laurie Strode of this franchise, if there was a parallel.
Right.
If you wanted to make that parallel.
Yeah.
Anyway, I talked over that exciting scene there, sorry.
No. No, that was a dream. The old dream at the end of the Friday the 13th movie in a hospital. But they kind of do the double fake out here. Well, I shouldn't say that. What we're seeing here at the end was intended to be real. Like even this, the Jason, like it's it's sort of the end of him haunting Tommy.
Because he's back to the sloped shoulders.
But also the way he fades out, like he doesn't just disappear. Tommy witnesses him.
Well, Tommy's now controlling. He's controlling his vision.
He's sort of it's in him. He's accepted it. It's not Jason sort of haunting him anymore. It's that it's in him now.
I really love, whether it was an accident or on purpose, the way the red blood drips down across Jason's eye to look almost like a red tear.
Right.
I think it's really evocative and effective. And the ear sticking out, like you're saying to yourself at the end of this movie, now there's Jason.
There's Jason, yeah.
But that's called, I think, either Dream Jason, I think is what this version's called.
Yeah, now it's widely accepted that this is all has to be kind of a dream.
Yeah.
To I guess end this idea that, because Tommy in the next one obviously isn't a murderer. Like, he didn't go on some killing spree. You know what I mean? Of course, why the hell would he have the mask if this was supposed to be real? Or are they saying maybe he just took it? But they would put it in there. I don't know. It's weird that he has the mask.
They just wanted to give the audience this ambiguous sort of dark ending. And
I don't know. It's too ambiguous. He puts on the mask, pulls out a knife on her. We just don't see him kill her. But I think, they were just saying at the end, yep, he is Jason now. Which, again, was one of Steinman's directives when he took the role. Have a kill every 8 minutes or so and make him into Jason.
Yep.
And so,
there's a lot of things that Danny Steinman did right with this film. I just think he took it like 70% of the way instead of 100% of the the way, creatively.
Because that is kind of creepy and cool,
It is super
right?
cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
Sort of forced zoom in.
I absolutely love that. And that must have left the audience clapping and shrieking with delight.
Maybe. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean,
hopefully
their dislike for not having Jason was so much that they the switched course. So I don't know if people were necessarily clapping at the end or if they even knew what to make of it all. Really.
And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention, of course, the great Harry Manfredini.
Yeah.
He returned here again to create the music. Yes, some of the music is based on his previous motifs.
Well, he says, he was another one that was very confused by what was going on, why are we here with certain characters, and even disappointed that it wasn't Jason in the end. And so he said, kind of on this one, it was more like, I just applied the usual Jason music and it doesn't sound like his heart was in this one. Let's put it that way. I
just noticed that stunt coordinator Richard Warlock
and Roy's stunt double Tom Morga.
I just noticed as the credits were rolling.
Yeah.
One of the production directors was named Sylvia White. What a history the Whites have with the Friday the 13th franchise, my kin. You have Ted White, you have Douglas White, Sylvia White, and I don't mean to pick on you here, but I have not...
You haven't seen a Francazio up there?
I haven't seen a Francazio yet. I have not seen one single Francazio stepping up to the Friday the 13th plate.
That was because back then we just went by Smith.
Oh, well, there you go.
All right.
There you go. That makes sense. That's at least 4 Whites I've counted.
Oh, look at you.
See that?
Don't start getting all cocky on me, kid.
The Whites.
Oh, man.
So anyway, this was a blast.
This was a good one.
I was on the train coming here to do recording today. It really sunk into me how unbelievable it is that we're already 5 movies into this franchise.
Kind of halfway, almost halfway.
It's basically halfway.
From the main, movies. Yeah.
This season, as a natural season, would have, I think, 11 episodes. So, we are literally halfway.
Mm-hmm.
Joe and I are planning to do a live stream, literally called Haddonfield Radio's Halfway to 13 live stream. We're going to be doing that very soon. We'll keep you guys posted on that.
Yeah, be on the lookout for that.
And we're going to basically have a chance to just touch base with you guys live, see what you've thought about the episodes thus far, give you guys an idea of where we're going for the second half of the season with the rest of the films, and talk about some new movies that both of Joe and I have watched recently, and just have a good time. Take your calls like we do on our live stream. So we're not exactly sure when that's going to happen, but we will keep you posted.
Yeah,
on it,
we'll be
right?
deciding soon, so keep an eye out for that.
That'll be our next live stream, and it will be sort of just a touch base point for this season. Just I don't know,
Halfway,
just
the halfway point,
halfway
yeah.
to 13.
Yeah.
But the next official episode of Haddonfield
A
Radio.
lot of people really like the next one, right? It's considered probably the best to a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Episode 28 will be, of course, Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Directed by Tom McLaughlin, and I think it came out, amazingly enough, in 1986. So I think it was literally another year, another movie.
Yeah, they don't want to let
That
time
would
go
mean
by.
at that point they would have accomplished 6 films in 6 years. That's
Wow,
shocking.
That's a lot. It's a lot.
And every single one of those films, objectively, is a financial hit for them.
Yeah. Well, that's why they keep doing one a year.
Fascinating.
Easy way to make
Fascinating
15
thing.
mil or so, you know?
So yeah, we'll be doing that next. That'll be next time. You guys, if you're a listener in the future, you can check that episode out right now. So yeah. But anyway, we absolutely, sincerely, genuinely appreciate every single one of you that have taken the time out of your busy lives and busy schedules to spend the last few hours listening to Joe and I jibber jabber about Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, right?
Yes.
We love you guys so, so much. This has been so much fun talking about this movie. A crazy production, a wild swing that, you know, maybe hits as much as it misses. But we're about to head into, like Joe said, one of, I think, Fandom's favorite Fridays, Jason Lives.
Yes.
So that's going to be fun to dig into and deep dive into. But yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we're good. Just thank you to everybody for listening and hit that subscribe button.
So yeah, I've got nothing else either. So I guess with that said, that's a wrap for Friday 5. We will see you next time for episode 28. Until then, my name, as always, has been Christian White.
And I'm Joe Francazio.
Og ha en veldig glad Halloween.
Killer, mommy. Killer.
Killer.